But anyway, I do believe that we came here to talk about
you know who
Things, yeah?
you know who isn't toxically masculine despite undeniably being a masculine figure. Okay, so here's where I wanted to start this conversation, George.
I like
Here's where I wanted to start this conversation, George. Okay, we can go where we wanted, but I've had this in my head for ages, and I floated this on Twitter. Got a few responses, but I want to hit you with it cold and see where we go. Okay, so you are in the situation where you are facing down, you're facing possible death.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to be the decoy so your friends can do the big thing and defeat the big bad. To do that, you have to stand on top of a trailer and you have to strap on an electric guitar. And you have to summon all the demons of hell onto your position to get them off your friend's back. And that's the role you have chosen. This is your moment. And the gods and goddesses have granted you the power so that your fingers can play whatever song you want. What is the song that you play?
Oh my God. It would probably be a Pink Floyd number.
Nice.
It'd probably be Comfortably Numb.
Wow.
It'd be Comfortably Numb for me.
Great. Yeah.
Definitely. Although, I mean, there are so many musical motifs and cues, particularly in season 4. And one of the others that I would definitely have played is something by Kate Bush, because I'm a huge fan, huge fan.
Yeah.
And oh my God, the fact that there are like entire generations who are now being exposed to Kate Bush for the first time as a result of this fucking show. It's like, yeah, that's amazing. That is just
Kate Bush
the best.
and vintage Metallica. I mean, how good is that?
It's wonderful.
It's so, that is like, I know this is an overused word, but that is wholesome. That is the definition of wholesome to me.
It's so wonderful. And like the way the show, particularly season 4, married its musical motifs and themes to the story, to the imagery.
Yeah,
I just thought was amazing. It could have so easily failed, right? The sequence with Eddie, the infamous sequence with Eddie where he plays Metallica. It's incredible. But how easily could that have been ridiculous, cheesy, contrived?
I'll go further. It shouldn't have worked.
Right.
I mean, you look at it on paper and it's like, oh, fuck off. But this to me is what to me this emphasizes is this is the power of long form storytelling.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this in the context of the Spider-Man movie No Way Home, and I was thinking about part of why that movie hits me so incredibly hard is because it's a movie that's only possible with the previous 20 years of first Sony and then Marvel making superhero movies and also Spider-Man movies. And you need all of that to build to this moment where you get this amazing payoff where you collide it all and you bring it all together.
Yeah. You earn it, don't you? You earn it somehow.
Exactly. And the emotional punch that film has for me, it punches way above its weight in terms of the content for me. And the reviews have been favorable, but they've not been overwhelming. I actually found it a close to overwhelming experience to watch in the cinema. And I felt exactly the same way about Stranger Things season 4. And I think that's why, because this isn't something that they just did. They built to this for 4 seasons. They built to this moment in terms of building up the villain and building up Eleven and building up the gang, and then Eddie's story in season 4 it's wonderful because it's actually, if you think about it, his story is almost a microcosm of the kids' story, so it's almost a retelling in one season of what the gang have gone through in 4, but it's also Eddie's story.
Yeah, and the fact that he slots in so well. I mean, this is a new character, right, for season 4. We've never had hide nor hair of him before. But owing to the character's framing, the actor, who is absolutely incredible, his relationships to the other characters, obviously primarily Dustin, he just slots in. He slots in so beautifully and has one of the most wonderful arcs in the entire thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And I mean, if you think about it, there are actually, and this is an interesting thing because on the surface they're very different characters, but his arc and Steve's arc are actually very similar. Yeah. Steve's transitioning from jock to human.
Right.
Whereas it's
almost in terms of its like sacrificial elements. I thought I sort of associated him with Billy from season 3.
Sure.
That's his abusive brother. They're almost like mirrors.
Oh, that's really good. But like like Eddie's the good twin, right?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly that. And it's interesting, isn't it? It is fascinating because they die in very similar ways.
Yeah.
Spoilers, by the way, guys. We are going to assume if you're listening to this that you have watched Stranger Things. Please,
probably put that up front.
Well, maybe you've put that before, but sorry, but there you are. They die in very similar ways, in very similar circumstances. For Billy, obviously, it's semi-redemptive, right? Because he's a bad guy. He is a very, very bad person, but he has his moment. He has his moment where he steps up, right? He steps up for Max and for the guys. With Eddie, it's just because he is fundamentally a good guy.
Yeah.
You know, he is the protective elder brother of these characters, isn't he?
I think one of the things I really like about Eddie is he is superficially a complete fuck up, right? He's
right.
It's the second time repeating that grade, you know.
Yeah.
And really, the only thing he's got going for him is that he runs the D&D club, you know. Yeah. But what I like about what the show does, and it's interesting how unusual this is in storytelling. That, and in and of itself, is very telling. It takes a character who any other show would portray that character as a total fucking loser, and as a bad person. This is the guy who, in most high school movies, is a fucking bully.
Oh yeah, always a victim. Very often they're victim characters, aren't they? Like they pay for their sins, you know. I mean, he's also a drug dealer as well, you know. I mean, that's another thing as well. But even that has a sort of sympathetic spin on it. I love that whole sequence.
Very ethical drug dealer. I mean, you know, he doesn't really like dealing the heavier stuff. He's not comfortable about that.
Right, and the sequence in which we see him actually dealing in drugs, he's doing it for sympathetic reasons, right? And it's a very interesting dynamic where you've got the popular girl, right, the sort of prom queen girl, slumming it a little bit, diving into the depths because of this thing that's happening to her.
It's interesting. It's a thing. It made me think of, there's a similar sequence in, I think, the first season of Sopranos where. Or maybe the second season, where Tony's daughter Meadow is studying for finals, and her and her friend are really cramming their asses off because they're trying to get really high GPAs because they want to get into, you know, exclusive colleges. So they've got a lot of work to do. And there is a moment where one of them scores some amphetamines off of Christopher, which is Tony's cousin, but kind of a surrogate son figure, really, in the story. And it's great because Christopher's in this rock and a hard place situation where it's like, I absolutely, if anyone ever finds out I sold Meadow soprano drugs, I will be killed.
Yes,
and that's not an exaggeration. Like, I will be killed. But Meadow just brutally blackmails him by like, look, we're going to go and score it in the street if you don't give it to us, and we might get held up and we might get hurt, and that'll be on you. And he's just like, okay, you never ever fucking talk about this. But again, the parallel that I thought about there was just, it was the fact that it because to me it's really interesting. It was kind of a medicinal thing in both cases. In the case of Meadow, she wants amphetamines not because she's trying to get high, but because she needs to fucking stay awake. She's trying to cram.
It's almost functional, isn't it?
It really is functional, yeah. And it's a similar thing in this case. This girl's actually just trying to medicate.
Yeah, she's trying to get Vecna out of her head, right?
Right. And I mean, and it's just, I like that, and that's kind of, if you think about it, like that's subversive as fuck.
It really is. And the fact that, I mean, it goes even further. They didn't have to do this. The writers did not have to do this, but they establish an entire backstory.
Yeah.
Between Eddie and her, you know, they were childhood friends, and then they moved apart. They forgot one another, right?
But one of the things I really love about it is, especially in that scene, I mean, I've seen versions of that scene played out a lot, but the Eddie character is always sullen and resentful and sneering. Oh, so you need me now?
Yeah,
you
cowardly.
Don't remember me from before. He's so gentle. He's so charming. He's so, and there is a fragility to him even there. You know, there is because it's not that he's not. You know, he acknowledges that he's kind of a little disappointed that she doesn't remember him.
Right.
But he does. But it's very wry. You know, it's not resentful.
Yes, it's not cruel, or he doesn't like take it to heart as such.
Yeah.
There's a fundamental sympathy for him, isn't there? And I mean, this is a subversion that runs throughout the entire thing, and it kind of ties into the themes of the entire show. All of them are outcasts, right? Yeah. It's drawing on that I mean, it's something the show does. It's part of the show's whole shtick. It's not trying to recreate the 1980s sincerely. It's trying to recreate the media landscape of the 1980s. So the familiar motifs and dynamics that you see are from American television and literature. They're from Stephen King novels. They're from cinema. They're from video games, and little bits of culture. I mean, Eddie manifests that completely. I mean, they even draw in the whole Satanic Panic around him.
Oh God, that was so good. That was my favorite. And the way that the Satanic Panic became ironically, the Satanic Panic itself became the animating force that turns the townspeople into a mob. That was what was so brilliant about that. Yeah, it was like the real panic is the Satanic Panic. You know what I mean? That's actually the real villain.
And the real monsters. I mean, it's that Clive Barkerian thing, isn't it? Of the real monsters are actually the clean-cut white bread.
Yeah. I mean, King does a bit of that as well, but Barker's the guy who takes that all the way, I think. Yeah, but yeah.
I mean, the King influence in Stranger Things is so profound, isn't it? I mean, it's so profound. I mean, even
they are the Losers Gang.
They're the Losers Club. They are absolutely the Losers Club. And with the dynamic of the Upside Down in the real world, that's very The Mist, is it not? The creatures that come through are basically straight out of The Mist. It's Lovecraftian. It's all. I mean, the Psychic Child from the Institute. It's Firestarter. It just goes on and on and on, right?
Yeah, and the fact that, I mean, it's a weird kind of almost Ouroboros moment, isn't it, when Finn Wolfhard goes on to play, goes on to play Richie in it, because it's like, that's just weird at this point. It's like he almost gets to go back to the source.
Yeah, it is slightly odd. He's becoming almost like you say, an Ouroboros, or like a paradox. Yeah.
But I mean, and I love that, because I mean, I have, as we've discussed previously several times, I have profound issues with Chapter 2. Chapter 1, I think, is fine, but I'll be eternally grateful to Stranger Things for giving me Phil Wolfhard as Richie, because his Richie is Richie. He absolutely fucking nailed that kid.
He's perfect, isn't it? I mean, he's kind of like, that kid has been catapulted to superstardom by this show, hasn't he? Yeah. He's in so much. Well, I say kid, he's not anymore, is he? None of them are.
No. But I love that, and I love that's something that is such a. And look, I mean, homage / rip-off, that I think that's a matter of perspective. I think Stranger Things collides enough ideas that it creates something new.
I think it's a total conscious homage. I think they're so evident. The things that it's drawing on are so evident that it is conscious. Not only is it conscious, but it expects the audience to be aware of them. It expects the audience to be somewhat literate in that regard, to be aware of like what was going on in the media landscape of the 1980s, because they're so overt. The things that it draws from are so overt. I mean, you've got the whole ensemble thing, which is, as you say, it's the Goonies. It's so much cinema from that era.
Yeah, but it's also, but again, for me, it's the way that it slams so many of those elements together, that it does create a kind of mosaic that is its own thing, that is its own kind of original picture, and it manages to do it without, as well, whilst retaining coherence, and I think that's impressive as well. I remember there's always a danger, I think, with shows like that, where you have too many collision of elements, but you don't have any kind of unifying themes or any kind of unifying stories, and they just kind of become a bit of a mess. I mean, funnily enough, the one I always remember about this is the polar bears from the opening episode of Lost. And it was one of those things that really put me off the show, because I watched the entire first season, actually, but I remember getting about halfway through season 1 and being like, you're never paying off those polar bears.
You're absolutely right. They were just there.
That was just an arbitrary thing, and like, that's no good. Stranger Things doesn't do that. It does throw a shitload of elements at you, and there are things you look at. I mean, season 4, it's like, oh, okay, this is Nightmare on Elm Street. This guy stalks you in your dreams and then kills, and like, fine, but it's not. Firstly, that's not the only thing that's going on, and secondly, it feeds into the previous 3 seasons, and you can feel that it is building towards something big, like
I thought season 4 did that beautifully, actually. I was really impressed, because it is a danger with shows like this, that all of the elements that they brought together spiral out and don't actually cohere into anything. I think the way they did that in season 4, they dovetailed pretty much everything, and the ones that they did leave flailing are the subplots that probably should just go away, to be perfectly honest. I think they did it beautifully. I really do. Agree. I mean, it can be, I've been a bit up and down with Stranger Things. I loved season 1. Season 2, I felt sagged just a little bit, Season 3, I loved season 3. And 4, I think, is spectacular. I think season 4, they have just... I don't know whether it's like an imperative in the creators where they're like, okay, so we need to pay this off now. We really do need to do something special for the closing seasons of this show. But it is firing on all cylinders for me.
No, I agree. I think they've really let it fly for season 4, but they're also, I think they're very patiently built to the point where they can pay off. I mean, one of the things I find really great, I mean, look, the wheels could come off. We've got one more season to go, and maybe they'll fuck it up in the end. But right now, it feels to me not only that they know what they're doing, but they knew what they were doing from the start.
Right, that's a very clever thing, because I'm sure they didn't. I'm fairly certain they probably didn't, but it has come together in such a way that it feels coherent. It feels like they have. I mean, one of the most impressive elements of season 4 that's helped to cohere it so beautifully is establishing a proper antagonist. Yeah. Like, it's not just the weirdness seeping in from the upside down. It's not just like an animal like it was in season 1. It is a conscious planning monster that has a background, that has an actual background in the show. I thought that was brilliant.
I mean, I love that. I also love the hints that there's a power and an intelligence behind that one too.
Yeah, right. The big thing from season 3, the thing that the kid who was possessed by it, he just calls it him, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That there's like a something from the upside down, which is elementally evil.
Yeah. And I like because I think the way the kids described the season 4 antagonist was as the general, right?
Yeah.
But that still implies that there's a force even behind that. That's
something that's like
general of whose army, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's still that feeling of a big bad, which I love.
That does fit, because there are. I mean, as malevolent as Henry / Vecna is. There is a sense, particularly in some of his interactions with Elle, that there could be something there, right? That he could come back somehow.
It was very reminiscent to me of that particular thing. Was very reminiscent to me of like Vader and Star Wars. It felt very much like, and that's an interesting thing about. I mean, that's an interesting thing if you want to get into it about, in symbolism of storytelling relating to fascism, and that thing about how people who are drawn to fascism are often in part drawn to it by their own pain. And fascism tells them a lot of lies about how they can redirect that pain against other people, and that will make them feel better.
You're right.
And I say none of this in any way to, I mean, like, don't be a fascist, kids. And
yes.
Not so. This is not an excuse. I'm talking about. I'm describing a process. I'm not ascribing any kind of. To understand is not to excuse, right?
No, not at all.
What I'm trying to do is describe a process that I believe happens. It's not to excuse it in any way, or to remove agency from people who embrace that. That's not what I'm doing. But nonetheless, I think Star Wars gestures at that with Vader. It completely fucked up when it did the prequels, but I think with the Vader story in the original trilogy, it does that. And for me, Vecna's like that as well. It's that same thing, because Vecna is absolutely, unquestionably a product of horrific abuse.
Absolutely,
there's no getting around that.
That's it, isn't it? He is an abused child, and all of the ideology, the philosophy, which is effectively Darwinian, that he espouses. It's about cleansing, isn't it? Ultimately, he just wants a quiet reality. He doesn't want anything else to exist, because all he's ever known from existence is pain.
Yeah, and it is, again, it's a cod fascist misreading of Darwinism, just to kind of just to be fair to Charlie. It's just to be fair to old Charlie D, who gets a lot of shit.
Oh no, it is what is known as like social Darwinism, isn't it? Exactly. Which is complete bullshit. It's founded in fascist misreadings of Darwin's.
It's a corruption of and fundamental misunderstanding of a biological process.
But that is kind of the point, isn't it? Because that is true of Vecna too. He is misreading reality, right? I mean, Elle demonstrates that, right? She's abused too. She is in his exact position. She is in his exact position. She was fortunate, in the sense that she met the gang, she met the team, which has allowed her to be more than that.
Yeah, and she escaped somehow. She escaped. That's but I also think, I mean, it's interesting because when you look at it in that way, what that means is that the real villain, the real monster, is Papa, right?
Yeah.
because he's in a real, like, in a direct sense, he is the father of monsters. He's the father of all of the monsters.
And also, he is the one, him and his institution, they're the ones who open the Upside Down, aren't they? It's their fault. It's their, they see this capacity in children, and what do they do with it?
Yeah.
They mutilate and abuse the children. They don't see the potential of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I think it's fascinating, and it's interesting that he, this season saw the conclusion of his story. And I think the way that was handled was incredibly interesting, and really kind of, because it's one of the uncomfortable truths about abusive relationships. None of what I'm about to say should be taken as universal. I'm talking about instances of behavior. There's the usual almost infinite spectrum of human behavior. But one thing that can often happen in abusive relationships, especially parent-child, whether it's surrogate parent or real parent, biological parent, is that even after the child is aware that the abuse is abuse, even after the child has recognized that what happened was wrong, there will often still be a bond, an emotional bond with their abuser.
Oh yeah.
And that is something that's incredibly hard to break, and that some people find impossible to break, and that some people, for whatever reason, don't want to. That's also can be the way it goes. And I thought, but the thing is that we never handle it that way in fictional storytelling. The abusers are always monstrous, and treated as monsters and behave as monsters and dispatched as monsters by the victims often, or by the victim's surrogate in a kind of revenge scenario, right? And we're all just like, oh, that's good, and we all brush our hands and go, oh, that's wonderful. I thought it was so much more interesting how Stranger Things chose to handle this.
It was ambiguous, wasn't it? Really ambiguous as to what the emotional dynamic was there. Yeah.
And the closing scene between Papa and Eleven was just, for me anyway, just so powerful.
Yeah. Quiet and powerful, yeah.
It was the decisions that were made, particularly by Eleven, and by the actress playing her, I guess, the acting decisions as well, but also the writing decisions, the script decisions, what she said and what she didn't say, and that she chose to go to him.
Yeah.
But she didn't say the words that he wanted her to say. She just said goodbye. Fucking hell, man.
Yeah.
It was so good, because it was almost like she was walking a line between her own humanity and her own requirements for her own humanity to show some kind of sympathy in a dying man's moment, irrespective of who he was, but also the identity stuff around. But this is still the guy who did the thing, and
this is what you were talking about before. This is season 4 earning its moments.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because we know that this is probably, barring her and Mikey, this is the most significant relationship that she has, right?
I think there's no question it's equally significant. It has to be.
Right.
Because it's formative. I mean, for fuck's sake, she calls him father, she calls him Papa.
Yeah.
That's and he's mother and father to her. That's the only parental figure that she's had her entire life.
For the longest time, he was basically Alpha and Omega, wasn't he? He was God to her, right?
Right, exactly. So I think, you can't underweigh the significance of that. And as you say, I mean, we've had 4 seasons of this relationship at this point, mostly told in flashback, interestingly, but still, it carries an incredible weight. And to have that, God, I was in bits.
Yeah, I mean, this seems to be a theme of season 4. It's almost like what they're doing is they want the final confrontations in the next season to start off on a very strong and certain footing. So a lot of the narrative threads that have been left hanging or that have been ragged and ambiguous are being tied up here.
Well, I think what's happening is that the season 4 is putting the band back together. It's putting the gang back together. At the end of 3, they're kind of scattered.
It was all over the place, wasn't it?
Yeah.
See, at the end of season 3, it was really quite dark, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, people had died, people were scattered, they were mistrusting one another.
Yeah, and I think for me, the whole arc of season 4 is bringing the gang back together. getting them, and as you say, kind of strengthening them up, right, leveling them up in D&D terms,
because they need it against this villain.
They're gonna need it, because the final shot of season 4 is like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about moments, I mean, I know that most people will go for Eddie on the back of the van. For me, one of the most amazing moments was the confrontation with Vecna, which happens on multiple fronts. Everyone is fighting something different. Everyone is fighting a different battle, and they marry running up that hill to the actual Stranger Things theme tune.
Yeah.
And every movement and action is synced to the soundtrack.
Yeah.
It really got me, that moment. The sequence that particularly did it was the three who go and confront Vecna in his chamber, basically, when Nancy shoots him with the shotgun. Just fist bumping moment.
No, that was magic.
Incredible for me.
Yeah.
I just loved it. I loved every moment of it. And it's a difficult thing to do. We know as writers, this is difficult to do. You've got multiple different story arcs all playing out in separate locations, but which are interlinked, which have impact on one another.
Yeah.
All playing out at once. It's very, very well done. I've got to say, I've watched that sequence a couple of times in isolation, and it always gets me in the same way.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's fantastically well put together. And while we're talking of moments that really hit you, and one that I've really hit me that I've seen, I feel it's perhaps been a little under discussed in the wider fandom. I mean, Lucas's confrontation with the frat house guy. That punch up with Max in the background, kind of getting, and the way his sister gets involved.
It's
wonderfully.
Vicious, isn't it?
But
it's really
brutal.
Vicious.
Yeah, it's really, really tough and really, really uncomfortable. But something about that, I don't know. I was really struck by that scene and that sequence.
Well, there's a lot going on there, isn't there? There's a lot to unpick there. Not only have you got like the personal dynamic between those two. So Lucas was kind of seduced by that entire lifestyle earlier on in season 4. He wanted to be part of it, and that makes sense. That does make sense. I mean, he's a black kid in the 1980s in Middle America. He is going to be an outcast, right?
Yep.
It's one
of his few paths. Actually, one of his few paths to acceptability is athleticism.
Exactly.
It's one of the few arenas where he can compete as an equal and be treated as an equal. So yeah, I mean that's true in 2022. Never mind 1980.
Isn't it just? I mean, symbolically, there's a lot going on in that confrontation. Yeah. It's him fighting against everything that he thought he wanted, but has realized is corrupt.
Well, that's the thing for me. It's the assertion of the power structure, and it's the understanding that at a baseline, his membership of that power structure is always conditional.
Yeah, always.
It's always going to be conditional. It's always going to be one-sided, and that ties in with something you and I have been talking about in different contexts about this whole thing about like, do these people who are from various minority backgrounds not realize that they're going to end up in the same fucking cattle cart as the rest of us?
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, the best he is going to be is like ultimately a servant to these rich kids, right?
Yeah.
He's going to have to toe the line, no matter how far he gets. Doesn't matter how far he gets. He is always going to have to toe the line down to the finest detail.
And even then, it might not be enough. The rug can get pulled at any time for any arbitrary reason whatsoever, just for being who he is.
Exactly.
Just for the fact of his existence, and it's a brutal sequence, and it's quite tough to watch. One of the few moments that I found genuinely kind of, because it's a horror show, but most of the horror elements I just enjoy because
they're great.
It's great. It's
well realized. The effects are great, right?
The dog critters, which remind me, I mean, you said they were Lovecraftian. I mean, they look to me like something out of Half-Life. The ones with the big spouty head things. They're very Half-Life to me.
That is something I loved this season. The realization of the Upside Down this time round.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always been good. I love the Upside Down. I love the way, the sort of horrible organic lymphiness of it. I just, it's great. That's my jam. Give me that all day. Every day. I love the Upside Down, but it's taken to absolute extremes in this season. It seems to me they go really far trying to emphasize that this is an alien environment, but it's also very familiar. It's got these like broken elements of this world in it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I love about it. It is that, because it reminds me of the werewolf role playing game. They have this whole thing in that called the Umbra, where it's the spirit world, and it is a mirror of our world, but it contains spirits, and is a kind of multitude of kind of interesting kind of magical beings and what have you. But it feels like, it's basically like, what if that, but it's an Iron Maiden cover, like what if that, or an Iron Maiden cover meets Lovecraft meets whatever. Because you're right, it's squicky as fuck, it's organic as fuck. One of the things I loved this time was when I think because it's Eddie's first trip there, right, and they're like, don't touch any of the tentacles because it's all connected. There's like a shared consciousness, and it's just like, oh, fuck off.
It's almost like, it is like it's its own peculiar ecosystem, isn't it, where everything is connected to some sort of, I don't know, like a fungal central intelligence.
Well, this is it, isn't it? We're back to the question of what is the big bad, right? What is it all connected to?
It could have been Vecna, but it's not. He's just a part of it, right? He's just like a puppet of it. It's the thing, isn't it, from season 3? It's this him creature, whatever that is.
Yeah. Our true enemy has not yet revealed himself.
Not yet. Not yet. But it feels epic, doesn't it? I mean, that you do get that brief when you're getting Henry's background, you're getting Vecna's background, where you do see it. Where he encounters it. But it's just like, it's a form. It's like mist. It's like, it is genuinely Lovecraftian, right?
Yeah.
And you never really... He's very vague as to what their relationship actually is.
Yeah. And I think, and again, entirely deliberately on the part of the writers, they're keeping their powder dry, aren't they? But that was great. I mean, while we're talking about his backstory, by the way, I think it's probably worth just shout out to Robert Englund for one of the great single episode. Yeah. It wasn't a cameo because he wasn't playing himself, but you know what I mean, like that kind of, because I love the. I mean, this is a show that is not shy about wearing its influences on its sleeves, but even by this show's standards, the Hannibal Lecter intro there was fuck it. I mean, it was almost word for word, wasn't it? It was
right.
Like...
And having it being said by Robert Englund, I mean, Freddie himself. That's you. Stranger Things is the kind of show where you can just get away with that kind of thing, and not only can you get away with it, it actually works really, 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 really well.
Well, that's where I like the way they invert it, because the setup is Lecter, but actually the guy in the cell is Robert Englund, and it turns out he's the victim.
Yes, he is not the monster. It would have been so easy to have him as Vecna, wouldn't it? To have him like under the makeup, right?
Yeah, no, so much more interesting, and I love that. And again, because it's subverting the tropes about. I mean, I'm a huge Silence of the Lambs fan, but it converts the tropes about, or it challenges the tropes around mental health. I think there, the idea of the irredeemably crazy guy, and in this particular case, it's like, no, he's a victim.
Right, he is just a tortured, like a mutilated individual.
Yeah. What's happened to him is it transpires. His entire family has been murdered, and he's in prison for the rest of his life for a crime he didn't commit.
Yeah,
it's just he's an incredibly tragic character, actually.
And has basically lost his sanity. There's very little left of him, right?
He is also very damaged, as you would be. But I just think I love it, and I love how Robert Englund just grabbed it with both fucking hands. It was such a great performance. And so,
I think one of the benefits of it being Robert Englund is he's so distinct anyway, right? Just outside of makeup, he's such a who it is. You just know when it's Robert Englund, right? Yeah. And that allows them to really play it in this very wry way. The framing of, oh, look, it's Robert Englund. They know that people are going to see that and go, they're going to associate that with Vecna, with the dream murders and everything, and they're going to go, they're doing Nightmare on Elm Street effectively.
Yeah, and having him, it's no coincidence, is it, that they put Robert Englund in the Freddy Krueger season, right? I mean, that's,
of course not.
That was completely deliberate.
It's visual shorthand, right? It's visual shorthand.
Yeah, it's shorthand. It's also, I think, it's also, it's also respect. It's also paying respect, and
I guarantee if they could get someone like Stephen King to turn up, if they could get like that entire stable, if they could get Cronenberg, if they could get like Barker, any of them, they would have him in here.
Yeah, no, I think so. But for me, what I particularly appreciated was that it wasn't just a walk on. It was a proper acting role. It was a proper part, right? And he did a great fucking job with it. Because England, I think the thing about England for me is that I do think he's actually a little bit underrated as a performer. I think, Freddie is such an iconic character that it's almost like Freddie sucks all the oxygen out of the room. But Freddie is a co-authored creation, and England was a big part of that. Because especially when you look at the progression of Freddie between the first and the third and fourth movies, like a lot of that comes from the writers realizing what England could do.
Yeah.
And broadening the character and the scope. And I think he doesn't get enough credit, really.
You're absolutely right.
As an actor, he almost kind of co-authored Freddie, and he's an incredibly talented actor. And it was so great seeing him. Like I say, the fact he's playing a victim this time, the fact he's playing and he was mesmerizing while he was on camera.
Yeah. He played a great part. He really did. And it's just wonderful. It's something Stranger Things does really, really well. It layers in its touchstones. Beautifully. It knows who its audience is. It knows who it's playing to. I mean, one of the things I do love about it more than anything is the fact, it does know who it's playing to. So it is going for those of us who were like kids in the 1980s and 1990s. That is definitely true. But it's got this whole swathe of younger fans as well. Who won't necessarily understand these touchstones, but will they'll listen to podcasts like this, or they'll see their analysis online, and they'll go back and they'll look at what these touchstones are and then get into other stuff. That's brilliant. That's just the best thing, right? That's
something I really wanted to hit on the head, because one of the criticisms that I remember seeing a lot when the show first launched, in particular, I've seen less of it as it's gone on, but there were a lot of people who talked a lot about how it felt like it was very much a nostalgia piece, and it was playing into a kind of what was then very current 80s nostalgia more widely in the culture. And there was a line of criticism that was pretty dismissive of the show as a whole, by just saying, it's just a nostalgia trip for people who remember the 80s. All the you sit there and, remember that Coke commercial, remember that logo, remember that toy, remember that, I mean, the gag, I think, was funny enough. I just rewatched the first couple of episodes because we're watching it with kiddo now, and it was the bit with Elle and the Millennium Falcon, right? And it's like, make it fly, and Duster keeps dropping it, and like, I'm old enough, there was a bit of me going like, that's a fucking 83 Millennium Falcon, stop dropping it, it's worth a fortune, what are you doing? That's a very, very, that's a really nerdy response, that I'm prepared to own up to,
and a very adult response, right?
Well, there you go, exactly. But what's great is that, like, both of my stepkids, who are like 18 and 21 respectively, adore this series. They absolutely love it. My oldest, who's 21, she is obsessed with Stranger Things. She has watched this show like 4 or 5 times through. She's awesome. Absolutely obsessed with it. Now, that is not 80s nostalgia. She's got no living memory of that whatsoever. And she didn't watch it with us, so it's not like she had us sitting there pissing in our ears going, that's look at that, we actually had them, and blah blah blah. No, this is her thing. And that tells me that it's simply not, it's not actually a valid criticism of the show.
No, I mean,
and dismiss it as that, because the storytelling is hitting multiple generations, and it's hitting them really fucking hard.
If that were the case, if it were just an exercise in 80s nostalgia, then neither you nor I would give it that much credence, really, would we?
I don't think,
because you don't like the 80s at all. No, you're not a fan of that entire culture, right?
No. Wow. This is what we're talking about, right? This is why season 4, I mean, it's all good, but this is why season 4 for me was so powerful. Is because in season 4, they finally ripped the lid off and say, you know what? The 80s actually sucked. Sucked. Culturally, he sucks.
Right. This is, I mean, I think this is in all the seasons myself. That underlying level of criticism is definitely there. It definitely loves like 80s kids culture, you know?
Yeah.
It really does love that very wholesome idea of your little group of friends and whatnot. It loves that so much. And that is fine. That is a valid thing to love, right?
Yeah.
But it's not blind to the evils of 1980s culture, not on any level. And as you say, in season 4, I really do think they go for the throat with it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also think for me the fact that the kids are the losers gang is significant, because we've started watching it now with my youngest, who's 12, because we think she's at a level where she can cope with the horror now. And I'm really excited to be watching a proper horror series with her at last. So that we'll see how it goes. But so far so good. But one of the things that struck her that she wanted to talk about with me afterwards, which shouldn't have surprised me but did, it wasn't any of the monster stuff, which so far she's coped with all right. It was the bullying.
Right.
She had this whole thing of like, but they just hit that kid. They just what's that about? And like, and they didn't do anything. They didn't tell a teacher. They didn't say what, you know what, and trying to kind of get her head around like, well,
that was the culture. That was just how it was.
That's kind of what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really, and look, on the one side, that's really uplifting, right? That she's looking at that and like, I don't even recognize that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it speaks to what you were saying, I think, which is like, no, it was shit. Yeah. Being a kid in the 80s was shit, actually.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the lovely stuff, it only exists as a defense against that in many respects, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all losers gangs are gangs of necessity. You know, you're the kids that pull together because nobody else will. And yeah, absolutely. Under those circumstances, you can forge incredible bonds. You can develop incredible friendships. But there's also a lot of tension there. I mean, one of the things that I like is how much the gang argue with each other. Yeah,
and have real like problems as well. You know, season 4 does this really, really well, where there are misunderstandings.
Yeah,
they don't understand what one another are going through. Yeah, because of so much. I mean, Max and Lucas are a great example of this.
Yeah.
I mean, Max is effectively, again, another abused child, right? She's been abused by her brother and by her father, and neglected massively by her mother. So she has these enormous problems with trust and with affection and with being part of anything. In fact, Max in season 4 is an awesome character.
Absolutely.
They do a lot with her that I was quite surprised by.
Oh, I thought it was great. And for me as well, what I like with Max is, and this is something that the show does, and it's the kind of thing that can sometimes bug me if it's not done right, but I think the show's done it really well. The fact that Max is targeted by Vecna, it's almost like that is an externalization of Max's PTSD. Yeah. And the show doesn't pretend that Max doesn't have PTSD. She does. She's in counselling, and it's clear that that's what's a version of that is what's happening to her. So it's not like the Vecna thing is replacing that. No, but I do think it's fascinating that it's creating a relationship. It's almost as above, so below, right? Yeah.
Dynamically, it's exactly what's happening in It, right?
Yes.
The Vecna doesn't have a way in without the widespread abuses and subsequent neuroses of children, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Which are pervasive in this 1980s American setting.
Well, I mean, it's traumatized children, right?
Yeah, exactly that.
And and that's right, and that's why I love those scenes where they go in and they raid the school therapist's office to read through their notes, because it's like we need to find the other traumatized kids,
and it's like needle in a haystack, right? Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that he doesn't. I mean, I know he has other uses for Nancy when he lets her go, but it's interesting that he doesn't kill her, because she is really like strong in every single season of this show. She is one of those characters who brings everything together, who solves everything, and she gets a moment at the end of this. Of course, I love the confrontation between those two, because the actress does this brilliant thing where there is understanding on her face. She sees him eye to eye, and she's not afraid of him. There's a fuck you moment, which I amazing.
It's a great performance. I mean, she's a great actress. She's been great throughout the show, and again, as you said, season 4 is just where so many moments, so many things pay off. And yeah, no, it's a superb.
I mean, I couldn't believe actually what they did with Max at the end. I thought they were going to properly save her. I was quite shocked, that it let it go as far as it did.
That was upsetting.
Yeah.
I mean, that was genuinely. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that was one of the few one of the few moments of criticism I had about Summer 4 was that I did feel there were occasions where it felt to me like it ran just a little long. I don't mind longer episodes. I really don't. I mean, the story should be as long as it needs to be and not 1 second longer. And I think it mostly earned its keep, but there were a couple of occasions, and actually that finale moment was one of them for me, where it was, and I hate this, but there was just this voice in the back of my mind at a certain point when Eleven was conversing with Vecna and they're having the big conversation, and it was all of the revelations slamming home one after the other, right? It was an important moment, but there was a point about 2 or 3 minutes into that where I looked at my watch, I thought, I think if you've been choked for this long, you're probably dead. You know what I mean? Like, this is a hell of a lot of exposition that's happening while those people are being choked by tentacles. They've been being choked by tentacles. They're like, you can hand wave it and say, it's a semi-psychic conversation and it's taking us longer to see than it's taking them to have. Right. And that's probably, you know what I mean? Like, it's not in a way, it doesn't feel like a fair objection. It's almost it's almost like metatextual objection. But it did kind of, there were just a couple of moments like that where I was like, this is taking a bit long, you guys.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think that maybe just as a result of them cramming so much in.
Well, this is
just trying to get so much done at once. I mean, fair play to them. They do it well for the most part. They really do. The amount of stuff they're playing with here in these, hour and a half episodes is pretty impressive.
Oh, my feelings are overwhelmingly positive, to be crystal clear. But I just thought it was. I think, in the interest of fairness, I should point out I did have a couple of those moments this season, and I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a symptom of the sheer weight and volume of what they're trying to do.
It must have been difficult as well, because they've got like all of these different story arcs where they're trying to make the characters do something worthwhile, right? Where it all comes together at the end. I mean, the Russia subplot could have so easily faltered and spiraled into absolute nonsense, couldn't it? They could have just easily.
I mean, it was incredible to me how they decided to do. Effectively, they decided to do a season of Prison Break in the middle of like strange.
I was surprised at like where it went, like the suffering, the human abjection that it depicted. I was like, bloody hell, this is pretty harsh even for this show.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I liked that it gave David Harbour something to do, because I love him as an actor. He's actually, I mean, we haven't talked about the grown-ups yet. We haven't talked about
I mean, and that may be kind of deliberate, to be honest, because like this is the nature of the show, right? The adults are very often, and this is not a criticism. This is the nature of the story. They are the incidental characters.
Yeah, that's right. They're not the stars, are they?
No.
But I think I love Harbour as an actor in general. I think his there's something about, I mean, again, because I've rewatched the first couple of episodes of season 1 recently, the emotional journey this guy goes on is absolutely huge. He's such
Jim Hopper,
he's such a broken figure at the start of season 1. He's in such pain, and he's lost his daughter, and he's an alcoholic, and he's in terrible shape. And it's really interesting seeing his journey. And what's fascinating about the Russia chapter is like he's just emotionally at the end of season 3, he's just kind of got his house in order. Things are looking up. He's finally, he's in a stable relationship. He's got his surrogate daughter, and that's working well. He's becoming a heroic figure, a genuinely heroic figure. And then he's just cast straight into hell.
Yeah.
And it's just, I love how the guy plays it. I think it's a brilliant performance.
It's almost like what I got from the way he performed it was that he was using his trauma as his strength.
Yeah.
He was like, there is a weird strain of nihilism going on there, and yet at the same time, it's like I can stand this. I've been to actual hell.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen the
you
upside down. I've dealt with monsters and things that I've never imagined. I can fight through this, and I can do it for Elle. Right?
Yeah.
That's what it's ultimately about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, you know, I loved him in as Red Guardian in the Black Widow movie. I thought, because Red Guardian's one of my favorite kind of Marvel characters, and I was very pleasantly surprised by how sympathetically he was played in the Black Widow movie. I think they did a really good job with him. So I like the actor anyway. But it's been lovely watching his character. And again, we were talking. It's funny thinking about where we started the conversation, but in terms of like models of masculinity, I think Hopper's a really interesting character because he's developed in that sense as well. You know,
you see him wounded and traumatized almost from the very beginning as a result of the death of his daughter, and that changes him. It transforms him. It makes him he could have so easily been the archetype of toxic masculinity. I mean, he's a sheriff, he's a cop, you know. He could have been the archetype of toxic masculinity, and as a result of these experiences, he's not. He becomes something so much more than that.
Well, I mean, when the show starts, he's an alcoholic cop. He's an alcoholic sheriff sliding down, you know, and the only reason he's getting away with it is because he lives in a town where nothing ever happens.
Exactly right.
And what's interesting about his story, and it's been done before, but I think it's a good iteration of it, is where as the shit starts to hit the fan, it's almost like his heroism is drawn out of him by circumstance.
Yeah. And necessity, and
necessity. And there's also the fact, I think, because quite early on it's about a missing kid, and because that hooks back into his trauma, something about that connection, because that could break him completely, but instead something about it draws out to start with a kind of reluctant professionalism.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then gradually he becomes more and more emotionally invested. And then, of course, you know, he builds his relationship with Eleven, and it kind of goes from there. But I really love it. I love that arc for him. You know, and I love that character.
It's so lovely when they actually come back together, isn't it? When you see them at the end of season 4, that is the best.
Yeah.
That is the best. Because, of course, Eleven's had her trauma as well at that.
Oh, my goodness.
She's gone through so much and lost so much.
Yeah.
It's great. It's just a wonderful, wonderful moment to see them come back together.
Oh, and I mean the you know, we were talking earlier about the bullying, but the brutality of what Elle goes through in season 4 on that front is really, and again, I found that genuinely tough watching. You know,
it's horrible. It's absolutely repulsive, and so it's the pointlessness of it, isn't it, as well, the impotence of it. And you know, I know you shouldn't be like this, but when she does go off on the bully, it's like, well, I have no sympathy at all.
It's a good moment. I mean, what I like about that, again, and I like about the way it was handled in the show, is brilliantly, because I think what I like about that was it neither shirks on the ugliness of that moment and the brutality of it and the unpleasantness of it and the trauma of it, but it also it wasn't unsympathetic towards Elle either. It was really, really clever. And again, it was just that's a kind of moral and emotional maturity that I hadn't even realized has been missing from so much of what's going on in media at the moment.
And it's interesting that it occurs in this show, isn't it? Which you know, a lot of people do sort of not condemn, but they regard it as this whole, you know, slightly popcorn,
fluff.
You know, fluff, like this cheesy 1980s nostalgia trip.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on under the hood. There's a lot going on symbolically and thematically, but also in terms of the relationships between the characters. You know.
No, I agree, and I think particularly in that moment for me, what it was about was I felt that, you know, it somehow managed to portray a situation where, I mean, she does snap, she does lose control. Yeah. What she does is, you know, is an act of violence, is a serious, dangerous act of violence.
Right.
And it manages to both portray that, but I just think it was clever how you just kind of felt bad for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, like
it's a culture, it's a circumstantial thing, is it? It's culture. It's the culture that allows for this.
Well, not just allows for it, creates it, generates it, makes it almost an inevitability. Exactly.
Yeah.
And he just kind of feels sick to the stomach for kind of everyone. And I think that was really, really smart. really smart bit of filmmaking, and really, it just lets you sit with the discomfort. Doesn't provide easy, no one's like, no one's like, yeah, she fucking deserved it, don't worry about it. I mean, they are a little bit, but not really, because it was too much. What she did was too
and of course,
much,
Mikey's response to her, which is, it's kind of horror, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he's not sure when he sees her whether she's used her powers.
Right.
That's the fear, right? That's the fear I think that you have as the audience, that she's going to snap and it's going to be way worse than a broken nose.
Well, again, we're talking about the source material, right? This is sure, Firestar, also Carrie, and we know how that movie ends. Right?
It's also a comic book, right? It's the X-Men, yeah?
Yep, of course.
This is the X-Men, yeah?
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely...
There's always that moment with the X-Men where, is this person going to become a superhero or a supervillain, right? When their powers first manifest, it could go either way, right?
I mean, I do love the fact that the show also doesn't come down on the side of Elle conforming, basically, because it's not about her integrating. In fact, it doesn't want that for her. She doesn't want that, right? No. That's why she goes off in search of Papa again, to get her powers back, yeah? She doesn't want to be like everyone else, because she sees the ugliness of it. She sees the pointlessness of it. She's been outside of that sphere. And
that aspect of her, I mean, the fact that she's willing to make a deal with the devil to get her powers back, I love that. I love that character note for her. I think that's really strong, And
she's willing to go back into the source of all her nightmares, like the worst place in creation for her.
Yeah.
To get it done.
Yeah, and again, the heroism of that, but also, the kind of damaged nature of that. That's kind of I think the healthy thing to do is just to fuck off and leave it.
Right. Just let it go. Right. Yeah. But no, she dives right back in. She dives right back in.
Yeah. No.
And they all do, don't they? They all do that. I mean, I love the fuck it all heroism of Winona Ryder's character of choice, where it's like, we've got to go to Russia. All right. Let's go to Russia.
Right. Let's raise 10 grand from somewhere and bribe this. By the way, that guy, the pilot, the smuggler.
All of the Russian characters, all of them are so characterful. There's so much going on. Yeah. They didn't need to be. They could have just been complete functionaries, right?
Yeah.
But they've all got little weird quirks, and they're funny and interesting.
The smuggler and the guard, right? I mean, that was just, God, he was magic. Absolutely fantastic.
Anytime they're on screen. And also, of course, Brett Gelman as Murray. Murray is where suddenly he can do a martial art and
what's great about that, it felt like one of those quintessentially 80s moments where he says, I can do karate, and I bet everyone rolled their eyes fucking hell, man, you're gonna get killed. And I love it. He can actually do it.
He can actually fight, cool. Right? It's so funny. He is a quintessentially 80s stereotype, isn't he? Yes. That character is in everything. He's in everything from Poltergeist to Ghostbusters, Terminator. He is in everything. Predator. He is there. That character is there, and they've sort of crystallized him here. It's
wonderful.
It's somewhat genius, I've got to say.
No, I think it's absolutely great, and I love. There's so much about him. And what I love is it's almost a replay of his original arc, where it's like he's the tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. Oh no, he actually knows what he's talking about.
No, and he's actually correct.
And they pull that trick again, where it's like, oh yeah, he knows karate. Sure he does. Oh no, he actually does. Wow.
Okay. He is quintessential on that journey, right? They would never have gotten anywhere without him.
Where he plays the smuggler, that's my favourite bit.
Yeah.
When he's playing the smuggler in the, when they go back to the prison base.
And he's getting buddy with the
God, that's so great.
It's ridiculous and brilliant. It's utterly, utterly brilliant. I mean, this place is it's marketed as being just the worst kind of hellhole, right?
Yeah.
I just love the fact that not only do they break in once, but they keep going back.
That's so great. And it's wait, you want to break back in?
Awesome. It's like the writers went, okay, we need to take this further. How far can we go without it breaking down? Just how ridiculous can we get?
Oh, it's so much. And the thing is as well, for me, it all ties back into what I think Stranger Things is doing so well, is that it's unapologetically, it is unapologetically Pulp Fiction.
Yep.
And what I love about what Stranger Things is doing is Stranger Things to me is throwing down the gauntlet again. I feel that this is what I think King did in the 80s, and what a lot of great pulp writers have done down the years, is throwing down the gauntlet and saying, yeah, it's pulp. This is how good pulp can be. This is how high level quality pulp can be. This is how deep you can go with character work.
Yeah.
This is how complex you can go with psychology. This is how strong you can go with theme.
Right, exactly. Pulp and popular does not mean bad.
And it doesn't mean stupid either.
Doesn't mean stupid. No, exactly. Doesn't mean simple. It can do all of this wonderful stuff.
I mean, this is, we talked about it a couple of times, but this is how hard you can go on the politics. I mean, the fact that this season, weaponizes Satanic Panic and makes it unambiguously clear Satanic Panic was a fucking witch hunt.
Yeah.
It was an evil thing that damaged lives of innocent kids who were trying to have fun for absolutely no good reason whatsoever.
And a lot of Stephen King literature from the era has got no sympathy whatsoever for small town America and its culture. Certainly
no sympathy for the bigotries of it whatsoever.
Right. I mean, how easily is that entire culture turned against one innocent kid?
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's in many respects. I had this horrible fear all the way through that Eddie was going to get killed by the townspeople, that it was going to be like a lynching or something, or like a mob or whatever.
But you know what? There was that for me for a little while. There was the worst possible outcome for me was that he was going to turn out to be the villain.
Oh,
God. I had a creeping fear because he was set up because he joined the gang and because he was new to the gang and because he was older.
Right.
And because especially actually that first appearance, he is a bit over the top. He's really big and he does that whole, and there was a little bit of me was like, if this guy turns out to be the villain, I'm going to be so pissed off.
Right.
But I should have had more faith that these guys knew what they were doing.
Because I mean, he has become. Have you seen the way the internet has taken to it?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Oh,
he's become an industry. There are T-shirts. I've got one. There are T-shirts with Eddie Munson on.
Hellfire Club and
yeah, absolutely. It's crazy. I've got a convention later this year, and I guarantee you there are going to be hundreds of people who turn up in like Hellfire Club T-shirts and Eddie Munson T-shirts. I guarantee you there are.
No, he's wonderful, and he just kind of. I mean, it's funny. I remember there's a writer who I don't know. Can I call him a friend? Probably not, because we only know each other through Facebook. It's someone I admire. A guy called Bracken McLeod. He's a very horror and thriller writer, and he connected with Eddie really strongly. But he posted a photograph of himself in high school, and he's like, "I was Eddie."
Yes, I saw that. I saw that.
And I think it's interesting. I think obviously kids who didn't grow up in that era will relate to him perhaps in different ways. But there are. I mean, for me, I didn't look exactly like that, but I certainly were friends with kids who did. I mean, I had kids who looked exactly like Eddie, with the haircut, the jean jacket, the whole works. That was, I just making that guy. I can't tell you what it did for me. Just making that guy the hero. I didn't realize how badly I needed that.
And without being like too saccharine or simplistic about it either,
he's a 2-year dropout drug dealer.
Right. It was
and he's the good guy. I mean,
it's a brilliant bit of work. It really is. I mean, some of it is like serendipity as well. It's the fact that you've got like Joseph Quinn playing him, who just makes that character so sympathetic. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it is a performance for the age. But the other thing that, I mean, part of the reason he's so good is because what I love about Quinn's performance, and actually it goes back to that opening speech. He's simultaneously he is simultaneously charismatic and terrified. Yeah. And you see both. You see him, because the way he delivers that whole speech is full of bombast, and you can see why the rest of the gang have fallen in love with him.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
You can see why they're tied to it, but at the same time, the vulnerability is there when he talks about this is the year I'm going to actually graduate.
Yeah.
There's this undercurrent there that's really strong. And again, it comes out in the scene where we talked about earlier about where he's doing the drug deal. The way he approaches that whole scene is, he's not he's not resentful of the fact she doesn't remember all that kind of stuff, but there's something there emotional with him.
There's hurt, isn't there? There's a little bit of like, but he understands as well. I mean, this is another interesting thing about Eddie. He is smart.
Yeah.
He's smart, but just not in an academic way.
And he's kind of self-aware too,
Yeah.
And I love all of that about him. And I love, and I love the way he kind of, he spends the entire season running for perfectly valid moral reasons.
Right, yeah.
What else is he gonna do? And yet it eats at him. It bugs him the whole time that he's had to do that.
That he's had to run, that he couldn't. Well, I mean, to be 100% fair to him, what was he going to do? How was he going to fight?
He didn't have any choice in the matter. But
he was not going to get a fair shake by the culture he was in, was he?
But it speaks to his moral character, right?
Yeah.
That was a frustration for him, and of course, the way that it couldn't pay off in a more devastating way in the final episode.
Of course, I mean and like the dynamic between him and Dustin in that episode is friggin' amazing, right? It's just the best thing,
and it's really clever building the relationship with her, because Dustin, I think Dustin is a fantastic character. Again, I went back and watched the first couple of episodes recently, and I fell in love with Dustin all over again.
Yeah,
I think that he is just so utterly adorable, and he remains adorable through the entire show. He's just the beating heart, he's just this moral center all the time, Dustin, and but also his enthusiasm, his puppy dog energy is just
it's that whole thing of him, like, he knows what's going on a lot of the time, because he's so saturated in like the science fiction and the fantasy tropes that this situation is playing with, that he becomes he's certainly the one who gives the names to all the monsters,
right?
He's the one who christens the creatures as like Demogorgon and Vecna and whatnot. But he's also the one who often comes up with the solutions.
Well, he's the one who cracks the code about it being music, right? He's the one who goes running off scrambling for the tape. And I love that scene where it's like, why do we need the tape? We need the tape because I don't have time to explain. Just give it up.
Right. No, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, I just love that dynamic as well, by the way, because Vecna is nothing but manifest abuse and negativity. Yeah. The way they hide from him, the way they defend against him is by finding a good place.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. And for me as well, actually, the fact that it's music is incredibly significant, because to me that's, and I will, I won't be the only person who feels this way, but for me, music was absolutely a life-saving force when I was a teenager. If I hadn't had that anger, I mean, in my case, if I hadn't had the angry music to connect to that told me that I wasn't alone in feeling the way I felt,
right?
And that it was, on some level, I mean, if not valid, at least recognizable, at least experienced, at least
it's
part of other people's lived experience. I wasn't a fucking alien, right?
It wasn't aberrant,
Exactly. Or if it was, then I had aberrant company that I could be keeping.
Right.
Either way, right? But what's the central message there? You are not alone. That's the central message when you're feeling alone, you're feeling isolated. To have that connection to something bigger than you, and that's what music was and still is to me, to a degree. I mean, I'm in a more stable place now, but it's still it still connects me back to that way of feeling, and reminds me both of where I've come from and that I'm still a bit of an alien, and that's okay.
Right.
The trick is to find your fellow aliens, right?
And the fact that, I mean, they do go for the kind of music in this show as well that would appeal to that mindset, to those people, to us, basically.
And what for me is so brilliant is that the two tentpole tunes are Kate Bush and Metallica. That is perfect. Right. That is perfect.
Antipodean, and yet somehow so perfect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, what's brilliant about both of those picks is that they are resolutely mainstream successes who are also resolutely outsiders. I mean, that's the thing about both of those. Certainly in that era of Metallica. I mean, I don't want to get to the whole late career Metallica conversation, but yeah. As I say, I've always loved Kate Bush ever since I was a kid, but I still do. She's very like Clive Barker for me. I don't understand listening to her how she ever had a popular career, right? Because it's so complex what she does. It's so, just musically alone,
just looking at her vocal performances, they are insanely complex. If you look at, look, you could take the chorus of Running Up That Hill, where she switches within the actual chorus itself. She switches from doing like her chest voice to her high voice and back again within the space of a few syllables. It's like, it's insane.
Yeah. But the thing is as well, I think to kind of speak to what you said and to answer the question, for both acts, to be fair, because, you know, let's face it, when Master of Puppets came out and went platinum, Metallica were unapologetically a thrash metal band, and thrash metal was not mainstream. I mean, it just wasn't. And yet they sold millions of copies. I think the answer in both cases is sometimes, when it comes to popular art, sometimes quality will out.
Yeah. It just,
what they've got in common is they're fucking brilliant at what they do. Yeah. They're probably the best in the world at what they do. And that's not always enough, but sometimes it is. And that will just resonate regardless of whether or not you like that kind of music in general, regardless of whether or not it's a kind of like quote unquote normal people will buy it and listen to it just because it's really fucking good.
Just because it's good, you know? Yeah, absolutely.
And
I cannot get, like, she did everything that like the music industry at the time, she did everything that they said you shouldn't do. She hardly ever did any live performances. She didn't tour at all. And yet somehow this alchemy, this magic happened.
But, you know, I mean, if you zig when everyone else is zagging and your zig's good enough, you know.
Sometimes, sometimes it works, doesn't it?
Sometimes it lands, you know.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And look, as you said, the fact that a whole new generation's been affected. I mean, funnily enough, I was playing Master of Puppets when I picked the kid up from school, and she said, "Oh, I know this."
Yeah. I know this from
Matey Boy and the she said Matey Boy in the Playground's been singing it, and I was like, okay. I bet I know why.
That's so cool. That is so cool. Yeah. And the fact that now they have an anchorage as well, they have an association with it.
Yeah.
That's going to make all the difference, you know.
And again, for me, the fact that, you know, for that particular artist, the fact that they've also got Eddie as the kind of avatar for metal, and that's so great for me, because it's like, that's instead of whatever cliche you've had from previous generations of what metalheads are like. Because we're always portrayed as fucking troglodytes. We're always portrayed as, like, you know, sexist, bully, loser, dropout, scumbag, drug addict. That is the metalhead fucking. It's the cliche.
Stereotype, isn't it?
It is the stereotype. And look, I mean, fucking Cry Me a River, right? I'm not going to play Oppression Olympics and pretend it's in the grand scheme of things it amounts to a hill of beans, but it does piss me off.
Yeah.
It is unfair. And to have just someone as beautiful and pure and rounded and wonderful as Eddie out there now, it's like, no, that's what we were always like, you know.
Well, it's odd, isn't it? Because
way truer to form.
It's a similar thing you often get as someone who enjoys horror, isn't it? From a popular perspective, there is this wariness almost, as though because you like this material, and certainly because you create this material, there's something very wrong with you.
Yeah, that's right, exactly, and that you're all freaks and creepazoids and you know, whatever. And it's like, and again, actually, I think with metal and with horror, it's a very similar thing. There's that crossover. Like, no, that's we get all of our shit out of our system.
Exactly, actually,
relatively well adjusted.
Yes, we deal with it.
Exactly,
we don't deny
it. It's not happening. We face up to it. We own it. We express it.
And if in my meaner moments, in my crueler moments, I'd say something like, "We don't try to bury it beneath materialism and ephemera." You know. We don't bury it beneath like, oh, I've got to go back to the shop to return this because it doesn't work, or because I don't like it, or it doesn't fit. We actually face the demons, you know. We delve down into the shit and say, no, they're there. It's all there. All the rankness, all the darkness, all the potential for malevolence and evil and abuse is all there.
Yeah. Because the other thing we don't do is we don't make the mistake of thinking we can displace it onto a convenient societal social scapegoat.
Exactly.
And that they can carry all of our sins for us.
No, it belongs to us. And not only that, there's a kind of power in it a lot of the time as well. There is a kind of empowerment to it, you know, knowing you are the darkness.
Well, and just the ability it gives you to kind of interrogate the existing power structures and where things are. I mean, again, I'm back to the fact that this show. I mean, it's funny you saying it because I hadn't really thought of it before we started talking. But amongst other things, this show has, you know, not just a sympathetic, a positive portrayal of a high school drug dealer.
Yeah,
that's actually incredibly incendiary.
Yeah.
And it's kind of gone unremarked. I haven't seen anyone else talking about that.
That's a funny point, actually. But no, I haven't either. I haven't seen any pushback. I haven't seen any sort of like, you know, negative portrayals or anything like that. But that, again, it's kind of a microcosm of the themes of the show, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It is this Stephen King influence. It's something that was pervasive, certainly in sort of science fiction and horror of the era of the 1980s, which is questioning the prescribed narrative, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually I wouldn't. I'm trying to think now. I'm not sure King would have been enlightened enough to have a sympathetic drug dealer. Actually, I think in that sense, I think it goes further than perhaps King would have done.
Yeah,
in a good way. Yeah,
and that, you know, that may just be because of King's own experiences. You know,
sure. Yeah,
which were not good at the time.
No, that's, to be fair, yeah, drug dealers have not been a positive influence on Stevie's life. I think that's.
Although, to be fair, I do believe his particular addictions were largely legal, weren't they?
No, he had a coke habit.
Did he have a coke habit? Right.
Okay, so he had a serious cocaine habit in the 80s.
Right. So not legal, just the booze. But for his class.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
Sure. Well, he has. There's a very. It's interesting because it's in the stand. So at that point, he's still a long way off rehab. But there is a very telling sequence in the stand where the rock star wakes up and realizes like the cocaine's probably not a good idea, and he's surrounded by hangers on and people, and you do think like, what's that about then, Steve?
Yeah. No, I mean that must. I mean, it's not a moment I've ever had myself, but it must be a one when you have it.
Oh, what, the rock bottom? When
you hit that particular point and you realize that I either can't do this anymore or I've got to resign to my own slow suicide.
Yeah, I mean it's the kind of, this is going to kill me. I mean, interestingly, with King, it was an intervention, right? His family did the.
Yes, his family basically said you either stop or you go, right?
Yeah, I did the whole AA thing, which the kind of tough love thing, which is a model. You know, I mean, it has some successes. Yeah, I mean, the rock bottom's different. I think rock bottom's more about finding your own spot, and it's. I mean, again, even within AA and the model, like, they do acknowledge that not everyone hits it, and not everyone recognizes when they do. Like, some people never do, and they just keep going down. But yeah, I think the more fortunate among us do have those moments in our lives where we realize, you know, you do get that triggering moment of like, I actually fundamentally cannot continue this way. I mean, I think I talked about it. I had it with the sleep deprivation thing, which has been an issue of mine since I've been a teenager. I've struggled with sleep. But I thought I'd hit an equilibrium with it, and I just hadn't. I was spiraling and I hadn't realized. And I reached a point where I was too tired to write.
Yeah.
And I've never been that tired. And that was it for me. That was the wake up call of all wake up calls, because it's like, if I can't write, I'm not anything. You know, like, that's not acceptable to be in that state. So I'm going to have to make some changes to my life. And that's not that's not an addiction. That's not AA. That's not any. But
it's dynamically similar, isn't it?
Exactly. It has similar contours, right?
I mean, like, you know, I say I haven't had that, but I was speaking specifically with like addiction. But like, I think for me, it would have been the social anxiety.
Yeah, there you go.
It would have been the social anxiety, where it would have been like when you realize it is that moment where you're like, this is fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
This is fucking ridiculous. You know, you can't. You're having panic attacks on buses, and you can't go out without being afraid of like this needs to stop.
Right, that's the thing, isn't it? And it's that moment, and I think most people have some version of that happen at some point in their life. I mean, maybe some very lucky people don't, but I think a lot of people do, certainly. Yeah. And the power is in recognizing that moment when it arrives. And actually, in a way, it's almost a psychological trick, isn't it? You weaponize that moment in a positive way. You say, well, fuck that. I'm not doing that again. I
think what, like, the little microcosms of it that almost everyone has is when you have something like a breakup. When you have a breakup and it's really bad, you know, when you reach that depth of despondency and despair. Yeah. And you do hit the bottom. Yeah. And you realize that, okay, so this is where I am, and I need to rise again, you know, by whatever means.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I think so.
Whenever you have like a bereavement or it's when like a sense of identity is broken, isn't it? By whatever circumstance it might be.
Yeah, and I think also I think it's when you reach the point of where whatever it is, whether it's an emotional state or a physical state or a combination, where it just becomes intolerable, right?
Yeah.
And it just becomes like I cannot accept this as the status quo.
Yes.
I just cannot.
It's a standard of living, isn't it? It's a standard of existence that you're willing to accept or you're not willing to accept.
Yeah, it's a quality of life thing, and I think there's a thing about like when you're going through shit, you do what you got to do to get through it, and you there are various kind of survival mechanisms, and it's like I think for me there's a fundamental difference between surviving and living, and there are times when survival's all you're capable of, and that's fine. Like if that's and then you do what you need to do.
Yep.
But you've always got to have one eye on like, how do I get back to living?
Yes. Yeah.
How do I build back to that place?
Definitely. But no, I mean, I like what. When did you first come to Stranger Things? Did you watch like the first season when it originally aired?
Yeah. No, I followed it all the way through.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I do recall when I almost fell for it immediately. I've got to admit, and what got me was the title sequence. It was the opening sequence.
Yeah.
Because it so cleverly echoes TV of that era, American TV of that era. You know what it reminded me of more than anything? V.
Right. Yeah.
I just like this is the 1980s. This is it, but it's not the 1980s as lived. It's the 1980s as lived through media.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I kind of love that. I kind of love that about it.
I mean, it's interesting because for me, it was what hit me. What I immediately connected with was the Dungeons and Dragons, because I was a bit of a D&D kid myself.
Right.
And so for me, it was one of the few times. I think for me, it was one of the few times I'd seen Dungeons and Dragons portrayed on screen and actually captured the energy of what it felt like to play.
Yeah, and where it's not like very often portrayals of like tabletop role playing are very like portrayals of video gaming in popular TV. They just don't make any sense, right?
You get one or two things. It's either sneering, or it's written by someone who has never played a second of D&D in their life, has never watched anyone play a second of D&D in their life, has never read a D&D rulebook, knows nothing about it. And it's always, at least, sometimes it can be both, but it's always at least one of those two. I mean, gaming in general, like I remember when I got into poker, and then I watched, I think, season 1 of Prison Break. There's a poker game. I'm still angry about this. It's 10 years after, right? There's a poker game in season 1 of Prison Break, and they break the rules of poker to win. And it's just the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I'm watching thinking, how can you possibly get to the point where you're being paid enough money to write a television show and you write a poker game in it without understanding the rules of poker?
Right. I mean, if you don't understand, then all you need to do is put like they play a game of poker, and then you can actually fix it in production, right?
It's so fantastically stupid.
Right.
And it's just like, and like they, I mean, I don't want to. Who gives a fuck about Prison Break? But the point is, they needed the money. They had to win the money in the game, and the way, but the mechanic by which they did it was just not a mechanic that exists in a poker game. That's you can't win the pot just by outbidding your opponent.
Yeah,
it's not possible. If you bet more money than they've got, they call you with all the money they have got, and you show your cards. You can't just say, "Oh, well, you haven't got the money, so I win," because that, like, poker wouldn't work as a game if that's how it worked. It would always be won by the person with more money. That doesn't make, like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah,
you
get it.
It's just
all the time.
And you're right, video games is a classic.
Video games are a massive one. They're a massive one. It's gotten better. But if you go back before, like, I would say the mid-2000s and watch any television where there's a video game being played, very often, not only are they clearly not playing it, but whatever is going on the screen is often a video game from a different system from the one they're using.
That's right,
sound effects coming out of it are from a different game.
Yeah.
And they'll say shit like, "Oh, I'm going to get the high score." Now, people haven't talked about high score since the 1980s. Since the arcade machines, right?
Well, I think you and I talked about that. I think I can't remember. I think Half-Life was the point at which.
Yeah, right.
Because up to then you would get scores in first-person shooters, but I think Half-Life was the first one. And as soon as Half-Life did away with scores, that was it. They were gone forever. I don't think they've ever come back.
No, not really. There's a few like games that rely upon score, as a mechanic that have it, obviously, but as just an arbitrary thing that was a holdover from arcades that every video game had. No.
Well, where scoring snuck back in is as XP, right?
Yes.
So systems that have progression will use XP, but that is fundamentally different. Because XP
at least you can do something with it.
Well, an XP is a role-playing mechanic that predates video games. Actually, if you think about it, like that's a kind of, and it is a different, because it's not about the whole point of high scores is that's dick measuring at the end of the day. That's the point of high scores, exactly. And it's not, and we've found other ways to measure that now in video games. They've become more sophisticated, and it's a different thing now. And you're right. It's just
the portrayals of these things is amazing. Role playing is another one. Did you ever see? There's a film, ironically, from around the era in which Stranger Things is set, called Mazes and Monsters.
Oh, right, no.
Mazes and Monsters is a product of the moral panic, of the satanic panic, right? And it's this propaganda piece that is designed to show how Dungeons and Dragons is this corrupting influence that sends impressionable young teenagers mad and makes them self-harm and makes them suicidal. Tom Hanks's first film.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is he actually playing like a teenager in it?
Oh yeah. Wow. And he actually is a teenager in it. And he's this impressionable young guy who's drawn into a group not unlike the Hellfire Club. And because he's so impressionable, he loses his mind and he starts to think that he is the character that he's playing. And it's ridiculous. It's reactionary garbage. But kind of worth a watch for its historical value,
Right. But I mean, I think I think for me that was the thing that sold me on Stranger Things, was just seeing it and realizing, okay, this is coming from inside the culture. These are people who actually understand.
Isn't it fascinating? I mean, I was thinking about this earlier. The fact that it's describing the 1980s experience that it's describing is conspicuously USA centric. It's conspicuously American, but because that culture was so egregiously expansive at the time, as it always has been, we understand it here. We understand all of the cues and all of the, even like the visceral experience of the kids. We kind of get it because we had that too.
Well, I mean, the one that really hit me there, again, it's very early on, but there's 11 watching a Coke advert.
Yeah.
Feeling this really complicated wave of like a nostalgia for that era of Coke can design, which is something that we have, but also watching this advert and thinking that was a US advert. I never saw that.
Yeah,
and yet it still has the cultural resonance because Coke is such a ubiquitous
product. And in the 80s, it was Michael Jackson, wasn't it? It was everywhere.
Yeah. No,
couldn't move for it.
That's right. No, it was quite extraordinary. And just it was that kind of, it was moments like that. And you're right. It's, for me, it feeds into that wider thing of like, there's this weird kind of, so much of what I think of as culture actually is US culture, not UK, because it was such a predominant. I mean, like I grew up on the A Team and the Dukes of Hazzard.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, how relatable is that to a UK kid? Not at all, really.
Right. Likewise, here it would have been like the 1980s toy franchises of the era, and it would have been the Transformers. It would have been Masters of the Universe, Mask,
maybe Turtles.
Yes, a little later on. That was like early 90s, but definitely. I was well into that when I was a kid. Again, very, very, I mean, massively USA centric, right?
Totally, yeah. No, absolutely. All that kind of. I mean, I remember kind of. It's a funny thing. It's a bit of a side note, but I remember writing this thing about like fantasizing about food you see in various movies and cultural things. Like, as someone, I was talking about a very particular meatball sub that appears off camera in Point Break, and how I still find my mind periodically wondering how good must that thing be if he ordered 2 of them. Like, that must be the most. I don't think I've ever even eaten a meatball sub. I'm not even sure I could tell you what it is, but I really fancy it. And then someone actually in the replies posted a GIF of the turtles eating pizza, and I remember thinking like, shit, yeah, man.
I mean, like pizza, like in this country at the time, it's weird to think and it's weird to say, but at the time the Turtles hit, pizza in this country was still a little bit exotic.
Yeah, it was. Absolutely,
it was still this slightly odd thing. Like our parents would have maybe started to get into it, but it still wasn't as pervasive. The Turtles would have introduced that to the nth degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
We would have been like clamoring for pizza.
Yeah, and that kind of weird. And I think for me, there was it was reminding me of that. That's one of the things that reminded me of was that childhood envy of what I could see of American consumer culture. I mean, the other thing I remember vividly was getting, we've talked about this before as well, but I get the odd US comic book. And one of the things that fascinated me in that, almost as much as the stories, were the adverts. Both for confectionery that I'd never heard of. Three Musketeers, what the hell is that?
Yeah, I remember that too. Like adverts for like Oreos, which you just didn't get in this country back then. And Nabisco sweets and biscuits. And
all of that stuff. And it was really like, and reading all that, just being like, what is this stuff? And then weird stuff like Slim Jim. I still don't know what Slim Jim is. Like,
I think it's like a pepperami. It's like a meat product, I think.
Oh, right. It's like a kind of jerky thing, or
I think so.
But then you see stuff like, I mean, I can picture it in my head, the Nintendo Power Glove.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's just thinking like, holy fuck.
Yeah, right.
You know, that looks amazing. And I didn't even know what a NES looked like. I didn't even know what a NES display. My gaming experience at that point was ZX Spectrum. No clue.
Like the NES never really penetrated here. That you could get it.
There
were but it was never really a thing here. That's an odd thing when you talk to like Americans who were kids at the time.
Yeah.
Because it was so ubiquitous over there.
Yeah.
To the point whereby it became a case of synecdoche. So people like parents would say, are you going on the Nintendo, are you? When they meant a computer.
Right, any games console was a Nintendo.
Any games console was a Nintendo, basically.
It's like the Hoover thing, right?
Exactly, like Hoover's here,
Yeah. No, that's right. And I mean, I think for me, I think the SNES was the one that broke through more in the UK domestic market. That was when it started to become. But yeah, so I think for me, you're right. There's a really complicated layer with Stranger Things where I get these kind of echoes of this kind of cultural envy, this kind of consumer product envy, and yet it's combined with a kind of adult view of how I feel about the 80s in general and 80s consumer culture in particular. So it's interesting because there's two different emotional tracks running there. There's this kind of base level childlike kind of, but it's also tinged now with a kind of like, Jesus, this is just all so ugly. It's all so ugly.
It's quite complex. You know what I get, the sort of the equivalent of that for me is in terms of the settings.
Yeah.
So I remember being exposed to American suburbia through films and television and whatnot as a kid, and being utterly fascinated by the imagery of it, by the way it was laid out, by the architecture of it and whatnot. Now these are places I've never been. I've never come even close to seeing them, but because of the way they've imprinted through media, they are parts of my internal landscape now.
Yeah.
So we understand them. You know, when we see them in things like Stranger Things, which are recalling those media landscapes, we know them very intimately. Even though we've never walked them, we've never been there, we've never seen them firsthand.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, and I agree with you. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, as I say, I have some sympathy, I think, for the people who felt turned off by the 80s-ness of it. But I do think I personally believe it's a complete misinterpretation to read Stranger Things as a love note to the 80s. I just don't think it is.
No, it is complex, it's ambiguous, that's for damn sure, but it does acknowledge the ugliness. It does go, actually it goes for the absolute throat with some of the nastier elements of 1980s American culture, that's for damn sure.
I think it's a love note to 80s horror culture.
Yeah.
I think it's a love note to 80s underclass culture, subcultures. I think that's what it's a love note to. And fundamentally, it's a love note to the outcasts. Yeah. Because they are our stars. Our stars are the losers. They are they're the unambiguous heroes of this story.
Well, like I said earlier, it does that very Nightbreed thing of making most of the institutions of what would be considered to be normality and order are evil.
Yeah.
Or they're broken to the point whereby those who are parts of them, who understand what's going on, have to leave them.
Yeah. Yeah, or they're indifferent, or they're just incapable of delivering what they. I mean, even like best case scenario, yeah, okay, so she's seeing a school counsellor, okay, fine. They can't touch the sides of what's going on with her.
Nope.
They just don't have a clue. They don't have the tools to do it.
Certainly not in the 1980s, for God's sake, can you imagine? What would a school counsellor in the UK school be like in the 1980s? It'd be like the gym teacher, wouldn't it? And they'd be telling you to
get more exercise.
Exactly. They'd be telling you grow up. Oh, if you were a boy, they'd be saying, be a man. That's what they'd be saying.
Run
stuff
around
like
the track, punch a pillow. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Okay. They'd be totally impotent. At best, they'd be impotent.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. I don't know. So I think it's that's interesting to me, because I don't think I could stomach watching a show that actually was a love note to the 80s. I think that would drive me insane.
No.
Full stop. I just couldn't. UK or US, it wouldn't matter. I think a show that was unambiguous love note, I'd be like,
oh God, no. I mean, have you seen you've seen Life on Mars, obviously.
Yes.
Have you seen Ashes to Ashes?
I watched the first season of it. But I struggled with it, I've got to be honest.
You struggled with Ashes to Ashes?
Yeah, I did. I think I struggled with the character of the lead. I think, I like the actress a great deal, but I felt I was struggling with the writing a bit, if I'm honest. I found her characterization a little bit. There's also, this is me, but there's a really unfortunate moment where she talks about, and it's because of it's a symptom of when it was written and who it was written by. But there's a moment where she talks about the Thatcher era, and she's like, oh yeah, but although she did a lot of bad things, it did ultimately pave the way for New Labour, which in the long run clearly turned out to be. And I was just like, oh, that's aged incredibly bad.
Incredibly bad. Yes, it really has. It really has.
That's not good. And it did kind of cause me a few problems, because it's like, okay, that's your mentality. Okay, I don't know that we're going to get on.
It made it difficult for you to sympathise with her. It is worth watching to the end.
Right.
I won't spoil it, but there's stuff that happens at the end that kind of puts paid to all of that.
Okay. All right.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I liked the ending of Ashes to Ashes. I thought it was very brave and phenomenally dark. I was like, no fucking way are they going here.
As I say, I enjoyed Life on Mars a great deal, and I think that
the ending, I couldn't believe it went where it went.
Oh, it was great.
I was like, no, the balls.
Yeah.
The balls on it to say, you know what? Life could be so intolerable.
Yeah.
Existence, not because of any particular factor of it, but just the phenomena of conscious existence.
Yeah.
Can be intolerable.
Yeah. No, it was.
I was like, that's true.
Yep.
That's fundamentally true.
Yeah.
And it's something hardly any of our media will go near.
Yeah. No, I thought it was, and the thing about it is, as well as when you kind of, it's almost a series that you almost have to watch twice, because as soon as you get to the end and you realize comprehensively what is and what has been going on the entire time, it does change your understanding of everything you've seen.
Yeah.
And you do have to go back and watch it again, saying, okay, so this is Sam's version.
Yeah, everything takes on a patina of symbolism. Everything does, it's very well done. I really enjoyed that show.
For me, there's something. Postmodernism is an overused term, and it's something I often struggle with. But I do think it does genuinely what that allows the show to do. And I don't know to what degree the writers were even conscious of this, but it's almost interrogating storytelling itself, because the whole thing is a story that Sam's telling himself. So,
exactly.
So then it becomes about, so why is he selecting these elements? What are these things that are coming out? And of course, everything that Sam's thinking about and the stories he constructs are, they're literally identical to the elements that the writer is pulling out and connecting, because that's what writing is, right?
Yeah, right.
It's the construction of narrative. It's the construction of story. So it's actually, it kind of is a show about storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
On quite a deep level,
Very much so. I was very impressed by Life on Mars. I liked Ashes to Ashes too. Sure. As I say, it is worth watching to the end.
Yeah. No,
there's stuff that does happen which is very, 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 very shocking.
Okay.
Very shocking. Which I was like, oh, you are. Yeah, that's kind of clever, and also in its own weird way, it's kind of self-mutilating because it effectively attacks its own audience.
Right,
it's very interesting. It's very clever.
Okay, well, maybe I'll stick with it then.
Yeah, worth a look. Definitely worth a look. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm just now. I'm wondering what they're going to do with season 5 of Stranger Things. You know, where's it? What's it going to be?
Well, it's clearly going to be apocalyptic, right? They've built to. I mean, the whole point of this season was to, as I said, was to put the band back together, and that the closing shot of the gang physically being together after a season of being scattered to the four winds, and then facing the horizon as the clouds form. Yeah, you know, it's like, okay, here we go. This is the kind of. It'll be interesting. I mean, my initial thoughts were, I wonder how long it's going to be. It might be quite short, potentially.
I imagine it's going to be like the latter half of season 4. You know, it's going to be like these longer episodes, but not that many of them.
I mean, that's what it feels like to me. It feels like they've hit a point now where it's kind of this is the final confrontation, and therefore it's got to be, you know, it's going to be huge, but it's also. I don't know how long you can sustain that. That's
it, isn't it? Because it can't just be like a climax that goes on, because it will lose steam, right? It will only be one note. They've set up some really cool stuff. I've got to say that I love what happens to Hawkins at the end of season 4. You know, the fact that there is no Upside Down really anymore. The Upside Down is now here.
Right.
It's seeping through into this reality.
And part of what I'm thinking about and questioning about is scale, because at the moment this whole thing has been centered on Hawkins, but obviously we're now at the point where this cannot go unnoticed by the wider world.
The wider world, right? So, I mean, if nothing else, there's certainly going to be more of like the governmental influence. There's going to be like a military. I would have thought there would be a military response going on here.
Yeah.
I imagine that's something they're going to have to navigate at some point.
Yeah, and I think there's some potentially interesting things there. And of course, you know, if you're looking at the source material and thinking about, I mean, it's started in the 70s, but he was working into the 80s. I mean, Ramiro had some very poignant things to say about governmental intervention in disaster areas.
Right,
you know, so there's some stuff there. Obviously, again, The Mist.
Yes,
there's a very strong potential reference point there, which I mean I feel to a degree already has been, but there's no reason that couldn't continue.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that's certainly going to be happening, you're going to be getting the creatures spilling through.
Yeah, that feels likely, doesn't it? And it'll be I'm fascinated. I don't really know. I don't really know what happens next, and that's a nice feeling as well.
Yeah, it's cool. It is cool.
You know, beyond the fact that it feels like a microcosm of the climax of the very first D&D game that opens the very first episode of the show, right?
Right. It's
it's the desperate dice roll,
right?
And it's the, you know, I mean that one's interesting because that one's obviously that's setting up season 1. So it's Mikey. Do you cast the fireball or do you cast the protection spell? And he goes for the fireball, and then fails the roll. So how closely that's going to track, I don't know. But the idea of that fundamental decision, when do you defend, when do you attack, and, you know, and also the fact that whole thing about, which again they recreate in this one, don't they, with the Hellfire Club with the D&D game, when it's all hanging on that one dice roll.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the way what happens in the show actually mirrors what goes on in their D&D games.
Yeah.
That I sincerely hope the writers have got the chutzpah to like pull that off.
I feel like they know what they're doing with that.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just kept coming back. So I feel like that's kind of almost inevitable, really.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm excited. I really am. I mean, there's a lot to be excited about at the moment. There's this strange, like, wave of I call it TV, but it's not. It's streaming shows, obviously, but TV on its way, which seems to be like a resurrection of fantasy. So there are three big shows heading this way at the moment. There's obviously the Rings of Power, which is the Lord. It's not the Lord of the Rings. It's sort of like between the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
There's the live action adaptation of Avatar, the Nickelodeon cartoon show.
Oh, okay.
Which could be absolutely incredible. Could potentially be amazing. I mean, that cartoon show. If you want one to watch with Kiddo Kit.
Okay.
Take a look at Avatar.
Is it the Last Airbender? Is that the?
That's
subtitle?
the one. The Last Airbender.
Okay, I know that one.
Yeah, not the film. Do not watch the film.
Okay.
It's garbage.
Okay.
Watch the cartoon show that's on Netflix.
Okay.
That is one of the best TV shows I've ever seen.
Okay.
It is so well written. It actually, like, every time I watch it, I'm like, how? And how is it a kid's cartoon? You know, it's just, it's incredible to me the way everything pays off in that show. If they do the live action adaptation with any degree of felicity, it will be good. You know, it'll be amazing.
Sure.
And the other one, of course, is the Game of Thrones spin-off.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We shall see.
We'll see. You know, maybe it'll be good. You know, I'll watch it. I'll see what it's like. You know.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. And then of course there's
Matt Smith.
Yeah, and then of course there's a Dungeons and Dragons movie coming out as well.
Yes, which looks like they've made it into a heist film, which is great. You know, I mean, if that's how you're gonna, I mean, that's what D&D often is. So yeah, why not? Be fun.
Worth a go.
Anything that washes away the aftertaste of that 1990s one. Do you remember that?
I mean, I didn't. Yeah, I know it only by reputation. Thankfully.
Oh wow! Oh, have you never seen it? Oh
no, I avoided it.
It's so worth watching.
Oh, really? Because I read the reviews and I was like, I don't think so.
Execrable. It is. It's one of those weird pieces of work where you watch it and you are in awe at how bad it is.
How bad it is. Okay.
Because like, it's a feat to create something where nothing works. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Not a performance, not a shot, not a sequence, not a costume, not a prop, nothing. It's incredible.
I mean, I do kind of feel that way about Batman versus Superman, but yeah, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, I mean, just for Jeremy Irons' performance, I mean, like, I don't know what he's doing, and like how the director did not go to him and go, Jeremy, tone it down.
Look, or is it that the director was like, no, more, no, Jeremy, I want more, and eventually he just went, all right. Fuck you then.
Whatever. All right. If you want me to make like Alan Rickman's performance in Robin Hood, the Prince of Thieves look subtle, all right, I'll go for it. Yeah, incredible stuff. It cannot be worse than that. It's actually functionally impossible for it to be worse than that. So whatever comes is going to be a step up, right?
Yeah, I think so. But you're right. It's interesting that you talk about it as a wave of fantasy, because I think as well that's a kind of under-remarked thing about Stranger Things. Everyone focuses on the horror, and of course it is horror, but it is horror fantasy specific. Well, right?
It's a lot of things all intermingled, isn't it? There's obviously a massive science fiction element in it. It's what would be called speculative fiction now.
Yeah.
But fantasy is definitely a part of it. I mean, like the D&D references, it kind of like interlayers them and intermingles them all together, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think the other thing, there was just one other thing I really wanted to focus on perhaps before because essentially we won't be getting towards wrapping up. But I did want to briefly talk about one of the things that I think the show does really well. We were talking earlier, we touched on the kind of portrayals of masculinity and you know, and how in a lot of ways they've done that in a very positive way. But I think one of my favorite things that the show's done is the love triangle between Nancy, Jonathan, and Steve.
Oh, it's so nice.
Because it's one of those. What I like so much about it is that it really does feel like there's no straightforward, obvious good guy or villain. Both of the boys have got their issues, right? Yeah. Like Steve, certainly, especially in season. I mean, Steve's developed, right? He's grown as a person, and that's good to see.
The mother figure.
Yeah, no, I love that.
How brilliant is that? He's become the parent.
Yeah. No, his relationship with Dustin is hilarious.
Oh, it is really sweet, isn't it?
No, it's screamingly funny. I love it, and I love it because it's still nerd versus jock. They're still from different tribes. They're not pretending they're not. But there's this sibling thing happening. This really healthy kind of older younger brother dynamic that's developed almost against their will.
Yeah,
it's just beautiful. But I love how, so Steve's developed, but his origin story, he's a jock and he's not a straightforward good guy in that first season.
He's not. He's very ambiguous in the first season. There's problems in the first season with Steve.
Yeah, and similarly, you've got Jonathan, who's the kind of shy, nerdy kind of, that. And the normal archetypal version of that story is that's the kid with the heart of gold who ends up with the blah blah. But he also, like, again in season 1, it's kind of a stalker, and it's kind of gross.
And those problematic elements really do continue through season 4, where he's become like a kind of stoner dropout.
No, he's become a pirate. I mean, I love that. I love his friend. That's sort of the. We've talked a lot about the performances on that show, but that is one of the straight up most joyous performances.
It's one of those performances where the actors realise, he is a sideline character. He is effectively a functionary.
Yeah.
So he's gone to himself, you know what, I'm going to make the very most of this.
Yeah. No, I'm just doing it. I'm just going for it. And he's wonderful. I just think it's a wonderful performance. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's another nice thing, isn't it? How Jonathan's issues have kind of, they've developed, they've changed, they've shifted, but he's still struggling, this kid.
And I do love the fact that triangle is still kind of fraught.
Very.
It's complicated, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't really know which way it's gonna go.
No. And I love how it's going to be a massive part of the last season is how it plays out. There's a good chance at least one of the boys doesn't make it.
I was just thinking that there's a very good chance that one of them doesn't come through, right?
Yeah, that could be how it goes. But I just think it's great, and I think both the boys play it really well. The dynamic is very well written. As I say, I love the fact that the show just lets you sit with. No, they've got both of these kids have actually got their problems.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of them are perfect human beings by any means, and it's quite. And the other thing I love is seeing how Nancy, and it's quite complex, how Nancy has to negotiate that.
Yeah, because what I found with season 4 is I didn't really know how it's going to come out.
No.
I honestly don't. There's because Nancy, I feel Nancy has almost transcended both of them.
Yeah. But I mean, Steve made a big play towards the end. I mean, he did it in a very gentle, careful, respectful way. That's part of how he's grown. But I mean, that pitch about, I told you about the Winnebago full of kids. Well, you're the missing piece of the puzzle, kid.
Right.
You know. And the other thing I think that's really interesting is by season 4, it's fairly clear to me that Nancy loves both of these guys.
Yes.
I mean, that's just pretty clear to me that she's very, very emotionally invested in both of them.
And that's wow, that's complex, right?
That's a thing, right? Again, it's one of the things that we're like, even in fiction, we're almost never allowed to talk about, right? That's just one of those things but especially in the teenage years, that's something that,
What, polyamory? Bloody hell. Yeah, that is just not it's still taboo, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But this portrayal of it, and again, it's very sensitively done, I think, and very, very intelligent. Like the emotional intelligence of it's really good. Because the other thing is, like, Nancy, in either case, if she's picking one of the boys, she's settling, not just in the sense of not having both of them, but settling in the sense that they've got, whichever one she picks, they've got their issues too that are part of it, and that she's going to have to deal with. And I think even for me, the portrayal of how the way in which she loves them and the way in which she's aware of those flaws and worried about them at the same, like, it's all there in the way it's performed. I don't know. I just think it's, again, for me, it's about the level of emotional intelligence and depth you can pull on in a piece of pulp fiction. The idea that pulp, because the thing about pulp is, one of the things I think we think about pulp is we think about archetypes. And again, this is an archetype. The love triangle. And it's the nerd and the jock.
Yeah, right.
That
and
is
the smart girl who's sort of like bouncing up and down between them. Right.
And the smart pretty girl who could go either way, right? and it's two different cultures, and she's torn between the two of them. And she loves Jonathan's brains, but Steve's a very good looking guy and charming as well. To be fair, charming character's good looking, charming, charismatic, good company. Jonathan's awkward and shy and brilliant. Yeah. And that's, again, these are archetypes, but the show just digs in really deep. Just really goes through it with the acting, with the writing, with the way it's played out.
It doesn't cop out, does it? No, it doesn't cop out. It doesn't go for like an easy answer. Thus far, it hasn't gone for the easy. I mean, you've got a similar thing now happening between Mike 11 and Will.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point, and we haven't talked about that. And that's, talk about. Again, it's funny. We were talking about earlier about Finn going on to do it, and of course, I think in terms of comparison points, this is how much better is this show handling
How much better? I mean, you've got two characters. You've got Robin and you've got Will.
Yeah.
Right. Robin is obviously older and she's much more overt with it. She does. Whereas Will is really struggling, which, being a gay guy, a gay teenager in the 1980s, you would.
No thanks. Yeah.
Would struggle with it.
Absolutely. And I think, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think you're right. I think part of how we know Steve's matured is the fact that he's got that relationship with Robin at this point, and it's just no big deal. Like, they're talking about women to each other.
They're kind of like, they're just like bros, aren't they?
Yeah,
they're besties. Exactly. That's all it is. And
that's lovely. And I also like the fact that although, and again, the intelligence of this, they're not really labeling Robin's neurodiversity, but she clearly is neurodiverse, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, that's stuff about like, I just talk and I can't control my own, blah blah blah, and it's like
kind of many of the characters have like neurodiverse traits.
Yeah. But what I like about that with Robin is that, in particular, is the way of, like, for me, it's that recognition of these people existed before we had a language for them.
Yes, right.
And these traits existed before we had the diagnosis and the medication. There was still people trying to live in the world, and I really love the way the show's done that. And what I love about it, it's not stepping outside of itself. It's just a good portrayal. It's a strong enough portrayal that as an intelligent audience, we're trusted to pick up on. Oh, right, she's right, got it.
Yeah, it's and it's not like one of the other things I love about it is that it's not made a muchness of. Like, it's not her defining character trait.
No, but again, what's very telling to me is, where does she find her tribe? She finds her tribe with the outcasts, because the outcasts are the ones who recognize, so you're a bit different in the way you talk. Yeah, but you're still one of us, right?
You're one of us, right?
Exactly. And I love that, because again, for me, there's a, I would say this with my politics and where we are right now in the world, but that the message there about solidarity across lines of oppression. None of this is language any of the characters would use, but that's the point, isn't it? They understand it on an instinctive level.
That is the point, and that is a theme of the show.
Yeah, I think it is.
That's the whole point of the confrontation between Lucas and the white bread pretty boy.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what that dynamic is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the forces of conservatism and conformity crashing up against the kids who just want to be themselves,
Yeah, and in the ultimate extreme, you get Vecna, who is like a reaction against that conformity, in the most extreme way, who is like the outcast who just wants to burn the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But in the process, what Vecna does is Vecna embraces not just his pain, but kind of internalizes his abuse and just turns it back out into the world. Vecna's failure is that he is perpetuating what was done to him.
That's right, and he's made like an ideology of it because he can't see any further. He can't experience any further than that.
But again, that's what the far right does. That's why one of the most chilling phrases in the English language is, "It never did me any harm."
Never did me any harm.
Because it's like, you are a fucking mess. What are you talking about?
And not only that, none of us are in a position to say that.
Right.
We don't have objectivity on that. Our minds, we can't assess the states of our own minds. It's one of the things we cannot do.
Yeah.
It's impossible. The instrument of analysis and the object are the same things.
That is true. I think there are things you can do. I think being aware of that is very important. And I think if you start on a process of analysis with that as your foundation and foundational understanding, I think you can do some useful things, and I think you can do some good work. But if you do not have that level of understanding, you are not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And also, you fundamentally do not understand yourself or the world that you live in. Like,
absolutely.
You fundamentally don't get it if you don't have that baseline. So again, actually, go back to where we started the entire conversation, I would argue that's a qualifying level that you have to reach before we can have a conversation about really anything important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like, the notion that that your contexts can improve. Your assumptions of the way things are or were can improve, even if they were good. Even if your experiences are positive.
Yeah,
you can still do better.
But also that they can develop, that they can see nuance, that they can, that they can be light and shade, that you can learn things that change your perspective, that give you a deeper understanding, and also that your life experience is not universal.
Exactly that. It's not universal.
And your reaction to your life experience is also not universal.
Right. Right.
And like really, really understanding that, really internalizing that. But again, for me, it's what I love about it with this gang of these kids is even with Steve, who's Steve on the surface is the kind of archetypal fitter in jock character. But But by this point, he has been changed so much by these kids and their experiences and their heroism and the adventures he's been on with them.
Yeah,
that he is now one of them, even though
he's an outsider now. He's become an exile.
I mean, that great moment where he's walking around. I mean, it was a bit of fan baiting, I realised, but having him walking around bare chested and he's got the cut, the leather, just the denim with the patches on that he's borrowed from our guy. It's just like,
well,
the moment 1,000 slash fictions were written.
Yeah, right. Wow. I mean, it's season 3 is the one for that. Season 3 is the one for that, where you have the blatantly homoerotic tensions between him and Billy.
Okay, yeah, sure.
It's ridiculous. It's fucking ridiculous. They're like, it is doing the Top Gun thing.
Right.
I swear it is doing Top Gun.
Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, Billy, the dynamic between Billy and him is exactly what you were talking about there, because Billy is kind of the one who shoves him from his perch, isn't he?
Right. Yeah. Sure.
He's the one who ousts him from that culture and becomes the new king of that particular turd pile.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, the sexualization of Billy is hilarious. I loved that in season 3. It's really fucking funny. Because the camera lingers over him as it would in any other show over like a female body.
Yeah, right.
Right, when he's the lifeguard at the pool.
Yeah.
It's like, for fuck's sake, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And this is absolutely ridiculous,
I mean, he's a good-looking guy, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Oh, fuck. God, he's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, he is absolutely stunning.
But it's just, I don't know. Yeah, I love. Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? It's a fun dynamic. But like I say, I mean, that's a good point. Again, it's the difference between them. But it's like, again, in both cases of those characters, the choices they make, right?
Mm-hmm.
Steve chooses to turn towards his better nature, and Billy chooses to double down on his arsehole.
On his damage, right? On his damage, because we find out that he was abused as well. Of course, that's what it is. I mean, again, it's a consistent theme, isn't it, in this show? Yeah. It's those people who take their damage and their abuse and make something good out of it, and those who don't.
Yeah. And I think again, what it comes down to is, I mean, the thing that we hit on there that I think is so important is the people who are the scariest, and ironically the people who are most likely to perpetuate the damage are the people who don't even realize they are.
Yeah.
Who don't even realize that the way they are in the world and what they perceive is actually a product of the fact that they have been brutalized in some way. And those
they
are
think it's right somehow that it is the way it is. And
those are the people who are most likely to perpetuate that brutalization onto others. They're most likely to continue it because they consider it to be a moral good, because it did them any harm.
It never did us any harm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. The fact, I mean, again, we keep coming back to it, but the fact you can get this out of Stranger Things.
Yeah.
And it's not like, it is implicit. It's actually part of the material.
It is. I mean, it's not beating you over the head with it. This is fundamentally a story about monsters and a demon dimension.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. It is cool.
And adventures in Russian prisons and all kinds of all that wonderful kind of pulp shit
horror novel. It's a comic book. Absolutely, it's a that's what it is. That's what it is. But it also has all of this wonderful stuff going on. These layers.
Surface, it's all there under the surface, and it is kind of interesting. I mean, the reason that we didn't hesitate very long before letting Kiddo watch it, even though she's 12 years old, and it's technically a 15 certificate, is there is just a kind of, for me, there's a baseline underlying wholesomeness to the whole thing.
There's a good humor to this show. There's a good feeling about it, like a bonhomie. There is this sense that it's welcoming. It's a strange thing, isn't it? You're like that unspoken ethos that some shows have, or some pieces of media have, where they can be either like alienating and dark and dirty, or they can be really warm. And this is warm. This despite all the horrific stuff that happens. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of horror in this show. It's still really warm and welcoming and wholesome.
And I think that's because of the love. I think that the show loves the characters. I think the show loves horror and what horror can do. It's a show made by people in love with pulp horror.
Yeah.
And that love just permeates everything. And
I think so.
The cast get it. They fucking get it.
Yeah.
You can see it in the choices they make and the performances they get. They fall in love with the story too. They fall in love with the characters.
It does happen, doesn't it? You get this weird alchemy where projects just work because everyone involved loves what they're doing.
Yeah. And look, and I will say this as well. I get, if there will be people for whom season 4 just laid it on a little too thick, and it would have taken them out of it, and it would have been, and I get that. I think for me, what I enjoyed was interrogating my own reaction to season 4 in a sense of saying, okay, if this were most other shows, you would consider this to be disqualifyingly indulgent at this point. Why instead are you sitting there with the goofiest grin? I've sat in front of a piece of media for a long time with what's different. Why has Stranger Things gotten past most of your critical faculties and turned you into a child? And I think it's that. I think it's that love. I think it's earned it. It's
sincerity, isn't it?
Well, it's earned it over 4 seasons of work. It's built to this moment, and it's love.
Yeah. It is sincerity. Ultimately, it's that thing. It's that X factor. It's that thing that I think a lot of us crave from our media, because we're bombarded with so much that doesn't believe in itself, that doesn't really want. It doesn't actually have that sense of itself.
I tell you what,
it does.
It yes to all of that. Also, to build on that, what it isn't is cynical.
Right.
It is not cynical. It's sometimes brutal. It's sometimes sad. It's sometimes unpleasant, but it is never cynical. And that for me is a dividing line. I was thinking about, like, there's a couple of shows that I feel the need to, I'm going to do something with them at some point, podcast or write about them or something, because they're really under my skin. The Shield and Sons of Anarchy, these two long running shows that I've watched.
Very cynical shows.
Yeah. And it's like I admire them a great deal, and they make me feel things, right? They make me feel things very strongly. I get very strong emotional reactions to both those shows. I don't think I actually like them.
Right.
I think I'm transfixed by them. I think I'm obsessed with them. I think I'll probably end up watching them again, God help me. But I don't actually like them, and I don't actually like the experience of watching them beyond a certain.
That's fascinating.
They make me feel kind of ill. They make me feel kind of grubby. And I think that is the difference. I think it is the cynicism. I think both of those shows ultimately have incredibly cynical views of human nature.
Sons of Anarchy definitely does. It's it's nihilistic. Sons of Anarchy is. It's like nobody's
seasons.
Nobody's salvageable in Sons of Anarchy. Everybody's a bastard. Everyone. It's that same species that comes from like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, where everyone, there is not a salvageable character in them. Now, don't get me wrong, I kind of love that sometimes. I want that dirt, I want to dive into it. And I think shows like Sons of Anarchy and Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul do it really, really well. But it can be really problematic. It is often reactionary, it is a reactionary position, that everyone is a cynical, self-serving bastard and will fuck you over at any given point, right?
Absolutely.
And that is problematic, but God help me if sometimes I don't go for that.
No, absolutely. But I think for me, it's what interested me was that then you put that up against something like Stranger Things, and that's when the night day difference comes in. You know,
because the funny thing is, this has all the same commentary on human nature. It does. There's all the darkness here. There's all the, but it's not contemptuous. That's the most interesting thing. It isn't contemptuous. Like when the townspeople turn on Eddie, it doesn't judge them that harshly. It doesn't make them monsters.
No,
it's quite clever in that regard.
Well, it leaves that to us to do, I think. Yeah. I mean, that's what I felt very strongly with that. Was the show understood it didn't need to overplay that moment because the audience, because we're so in love with Eddie at this point, right?
Yeah.
But also, like, it does almost go. The show does, to be fair, go almost out of its way to. I mean, if you remove everything that you as the audience know about Eddie and you only see the facts that are presented to the people of the town.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, it's kind of, in a way, it's fair enough, isn't it? He was the only one there when the girl was mute. I mean, she doesn't just die.
Yeah.
She's mutilated.
Yeah. No, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing. We're talking about this show like this kind of really kind of positive, loving affair. Like the deaths in season 4 are horrific.
They're more extreme than before, aren't they?
Yeah. And
they are more extreme.
If you think about it in terms of graphic nature, I'd say it's on a par of anything that actually does happen in, for example, Sons of Anarchy. Maybe not the last season, but a lot of it. And by the way, it's kids being killed here.
Yeah.
We're talking about teenagers being
murdered. Look at what happens with 11 when Henry is going around the institute like killing all of the numbers,
shit,
right?
That was amazing. What a sequence!
And then what happens to him after he's thrown into the upside down?
Yeah.
I
mean, because this is season 4 has been the season of revelation, hasn't it? That's been the purpose of it, and it's been let's tear off all the wounds, let's reveal all the secrets, so that in season 5 we can, it's all out war with nothing left in the closet, right? And that's great. But yeah, my God, I mean, and again, this show, so it's not that this show isn't a horror show, it absolutely is, but I think there's something about the way the story is told, and there's something about, I don't know, I'm going to need to pick at this a bit more, I think, as I think about it.
Me too. I mean, it's I think one of the areas where it really does emphasize that quality is the treatment of Max. So seeing her harmed in the way that she is so affecting.
Yeah.
Because of the emotional context of the show.
Yeah.
It's unexpected and it's completely horrific. I mean, it's just the worst thing. It's the worst thing imaginable. Whereas in something like Sons of Anarchy, where everyone is a bastard anyway, and violence and betrayal and whatnot, it's just part and parcel. It's not that much of a thing, is it?
No, I think it's, I mean, as well, I think for me with Sons of Anarchy in particular as an example, it's more kind of like the way the characters kind of systematically condemn themselves through their actions.
Right, whereas characters like Max, she's done nothing wrong. She is just a victim,
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, she's not even just a victim. She's a hero. I mean,
she's a hero. Yeah,
she's put herself in harm's way. She's taken the risk, and she's the key that turns the lock. None of what they're trying to do happens without what Max is doing. She's putting her trust. I mean, she's literally putting her life in their hands.
Yeah.
And she knows it could all go wrong. She's doing it. I mean, she's incredibly courageous. But yeah, it's a brutal loss because
again, there's a darkness there as well, because she's kind of nihilistic as well.
Yeah.
She feels ruined because of what's happened to her, and she's like, I don't matter that much.
Yeah, and part of what allows her to make the sacrifice is perhaps on some deeper level that kind of lack of self-esteem anyway, a lack of self-worth and self-value that says, which
is manifest in Billy, of course, which is how Vecna attacks her ultimately.
Yeah, right. Absolutely, that's where that comes from. And again, that just, I mean, it's not subtle stuff by any means, but that confrontation. I mean, again, there's echoes of Elm Street there, where you're confronting your darkest fears. Except, of course, Stranger Things is more emotionally intelligent, so it's your emotional nightmare rather than your
like
physical one. It's not like I'm scared of spiders or whatever. What the fuck ever. This is like, no, this is your deep rooted psychological pain.
This is what you're really afraid of. Exactly. This is what really makes you sick to your stomach, right?
And again, in the season that is clearly in part an homage to Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah. That's really smart. That they take it to that level, that they understand that, no, we're going to get you where you live.
Yeah.
No, I mean, as you say, it's fucking Billy. I mean, Jesus.
Yes, it manifests.
Of course, it's Billy.
Of course it is. I mean, Billy is the manifestation of all of her fears, but also really complex because, of course, she does still love him as her brother. I mean, the end of season 3, when, of course, he sacrifices himself to save them all.
Yeah.
She is upset but it's complex. She's relieved, she's upset, it's really powerful. It's good stuff. And again, Max is a later addition. She only turned up in season 3.
Yeah, and it's weird, isn't it? Because she does. I mean, I think it's partly because of the actress and partly because of the rest of the team. But it does feel like she's always been there.
Right. It feels like
she doesn't feel like a late addition, does she?
No, not at all. Not at all. But I was shocked with what they did with her. She's obviously going to have a part to play in season 5. It's clear to me that there's some psychological link between her and Vecna or something they're going to use or something like that. Maybe she's going to be able to see what he's doing or something like that.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? There's one thing, and I suspect, I don't know, I mean, I suspect I'd be interested to see how that plays out with Eleven's powers as well and her ability to communicate and reach people. I wonder how that's going to go. I mean, it's interesting how that echoes. I mean, thinking about it in terms of story mechanics, I was just thinking about this. Like, it's interesting how Max has kind of become the Will character, because Will, I mean, I got to admit, one of my big issues with season 2 was just like, you're not doing that to Will again.
Right, again. Really? Yes,
really.
Right.
And that was kind of, and it was a bit of a retread in some ways. It's just like,
yeah.
And I think it's interesting, as you said it, I realised, because Max has always become, I mean, she's not been served as tough as Will got it in the first 2 seasons, but there is a way in which Max is that Link character, right? She is that kind of. So I'd be surprised if that doesn't play out in season 5. It seems to me the natural thing to do.
Oh, it feels almost certain. Like my storyteller's craw is telling me that she will have a big part to play. I don't know how, as such, but it feels like she's going to be like psychologically somehow inside Vecna's head, or is somehow able to access the Upside Down.
Yeah. No, I think it's because she's definitely unfinished business.
Yeah.
Like, there's no getting past that.
Big style. I mean, if she wasn't, they'd have just killed her.
Right.
She'd have been like the death of the finale.
That would have been the big traumatic tombstone for absolutely. But
clearly there's something else going on. There's something.
There is.
But I'm fascinated. I cannot wait. Honestly, I'm so excited. I really am. It's unusual for a show to get me like this. It really is these days. But I am sincerely excited for whatever comes next. I have a lot of faith in these guys.
Well, and again, it just comes back to that. I think I'm really happy that we talked about this, because for me, it was getting to that cynicism versus love thing. I think that's it for me. And it's not a value judgment against cynical shows or people who like them, of whom I am one.
God, as I say, give me, as long it comes down to that thing we were talking about earlier, that sincerity. As long as it's sincere, as long as it's doing it for a reason, give it to me. I will dive into that. I will dive into that all day, every day. I really will. But at the same time, it is lovely to see something like this out there, isn't there?
I think that's the thing for me. Yeah, it's nice to have. And again, the fact that it's operating unapologetically, unambiguously in both the horror sphere and particularly the pulp horror sphere, that's actually important to me. Yeah. Because I'm increasingly realizing that is a big part of where my heart is. Me
too.
As an artist and as someone that consumes art, there will always be a massive place in my heart for pulp genre fiction in general, actually, in a pretty wide sense, but pulp horror in particular. There's a very, very, very special
pulp
place in my heart.
sci-fi as well.
Yeah.
I will just devour that stuff to the nth degree. I really will.
I got a lot of time. Pulp crime as well. I love.
Yeah, love me some pulp crime.
When it's done well, that's one of the most. That can be one of the most exhilarating kind of reading experiences or movie experiences you'll have. But so all of that, and it just for me, to find something that's so vigorously and unapologetically pulp and just so fucking good.
So in love with itself. I mean, and I don't mean that in like it's not egocentric or anything like that. It's in love with its subject matter.
That's it. Yeah, it's in love with the story. It's in love with the characters. Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. It really is. I will go to bat for Stranger Things.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. And they could fuck it up completely, right?
Yeah,
we could sat here in like 2 years' time, go, well, let's just pretend season 5 didn't happen. But
it could Game of Thrones. It could.
Of course it could. Of course it could. I don't think it will, because unlike Game of Thrones, these creators wrote the whole thing, so you don't have that issue of that Thrones had of just the cliff edge of running out of George R. R. Martin material. So I still think that's a big part of what did them over, really.
I think so. I definitely.
But we don't have that problem here. And the Duffer Brothers, they certainly know how to write, they certainly know how to set up, and they certainly know how to develop and build themes, because they've done that for 4 seasons. Whether or not they know how to end a show, I guess we're going to find out, right?
Well, we'll see, won't we?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. But and with that, Kit, shall we put this to a close?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've covered it off, yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to pimp before we go?
Oh, goodness, what am I doing at the moment? Let's have a think. So My Life in Horror is coming towards its end. I've just finished writing essays on the Insane Clown Posse's Great Milenko album, and what was the last thing I just did? Scream. I've just done an essay on Scream.
Oh.
So you can expect those dropping on Ginger Nuts of Horror in the next sort of month or so. So yeah, if you want to catch up on My Life in Horror before the grand finale, head over to Ginger Nuts of Horror. My Life in Horror's got its own area in the menu, and you can read, guys, over 50 essays now.
Yeah, it's extensive, isn't it?
Yeah, all kinds of stuff covering, the kind of things that George and I are talking about, but covering, Stephen King and various sort of pulp movies from the 80s and various other things that I was influenced by and damaged by as a child.
Yes.
So check that out by all means. And if you enjoy it and you want to get it in book format, My Life in Horror Volume 1 is available as paperback, hardback, and ebook. You can get them wherever books are sold. All my fiction is also available in similar levels of format. If you go to Amazon, you can look me up under books, under Kit Power. I've got my own author page on Amazon. Ebooks, feel free to buy them from Amazon. If you do have a local bookshop, please feel free to order my paperbacks via them, because I quite like to help keep them in business if we possibly can. And if you want to read those My Life in Horror essays before anybody else, if you want to get early access to those and indeed podcast materials similar to this, patreon.com/Kit Power. Simply $1 a month is all you need to pledge. You'll get something new from me every week, a mixture of audio and written material, fiction, non-fiction essays, reviews, and podcasts. So yeah, check those out.
Fabulous. Links to everything down below, ladies and gents. As for me, same as usual. Find me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy, currently playing through Shadow Man. Remember Shadow Man, Kit, from the late 1990s?
Not ringing a bell, actually.
Friggin' nasty horror game, that is.
Okay.
Nastier than I remember. Right. I'm a little bit shocked by it, I've got to say. But yeah, currently playing Shadow Man, which is great fun. You can also find links to all my written fiction over at strangeplaygrounds.com. Most recently, short story in the anthology Book of Queer Saints, which I'm really, 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 really happy with. And also my short story collections, Born in Blood, Volumes 1 and 2, which you can pick up from Perpetual Motion Machine Publications. Again, links over at strangeplaygrounds.com and below if you want fancy a look at those. And if you fancy chatting, you can come and chat to me over on Twitter at Enigmatic Elegy. And with that, Kit, thanks so much. I think this one was long overdue, wasn't it? Like Stranger Things?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is, I think I've been threatening to do Stranger Things since the first season ended, to talk about it on this channel.
Yeah, I'm really glad though, in retrospect, that we waited till we got 4 seasons, because I think season 4 was such a great moment. It's just it's just brought home to me, really looking back over the whole project, just how impressive it was. So
yeah, likewise. It's sort of crystallized my love for it. It's crystallized my love for it completely. And thank you all for listening to us witter on. Until next time, bye.
Bye. I mean, for me, it's just, I don't know. I think it's not done anything for my frame of mind at all. You know, it feels very much like it feels very much like End of the World. Rather, it feels very much like
yes.
You know, the Don't Look Up flashbacks have been pretty strong this week. You
absolutely.
know, seeing the clips of the idiots on GB News trying to be all like, it's wonderful, lovely sunny weather, snowflakes, and
I mean,
you know the weather, all the meteorologists or weather people being like, people are going to die.
People are going to die. Yeah, I mean, it's the escalation of the stupidity that really gets me. And I still keep thinking back. I remember when people like Nigel Farage and whatnot first started doing the rounds in this country, and I was horrified back then.
Yeah,
I was horrified that we allowed this. You know, that there was not some there was not some mechanism in place that would just eject him immediately from the discourse. You know,
right.
And the fact that it's escalated and escalated and escalated since then.
Yeah.
To the point whereby you have like platforms like GB News now.
Yeah.
Which is nothing but a crystallization of all the worst elements of the discourse. The misinformation, the negativity, the ignorance, the enshrinement of stupidity and bigotry. It is the worst. But then again, in and of itself, I was thinking about this earlier. In and of itself, it is not that aberrant when you stop to think about it. It is not that aberrant. We've always had this in this country. We've always had this very strange situation with our discourses where we allow people platforms who have nothing to fucking say on the subjects in question, whether it's Richard Madeley in the daytime. You know, what is Richard Madeley a fucking expert in? Fucking nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
So why is he given a platform to sit there talking to actual experts as though he has a fucking opinion?
I bow to no one in my hatred of Madeley, and I've hated Madeley for years and years and years. I despised him back when he was hosting This Morning.
Right.
You know, like I've long harbored a deep-seated. It's like, he's like if Alan Partridge was real. He's just, and yet he's. I don't mind the fact that he exists, but I resent the hell out of the fact that he's paid, you know, hundreds of thousands a year to pontificate on television.
Exactly, and it's not even him for me as such. I mean, he's just a nobody. He's a nothing. Insofar as I'm concerned, Madeley is like he's a vacuous spot in existence. He may as well be like a cutout, you know.
But he's a symptom, isn't he?
Yes, he's a symptom.
It's not the disease, but he's a symptom
of the problem, which has existed forever. It's existed since the platforms have existed. I mean, look back in the 1980s, we had fuckwits like Kilroy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, an expert in nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. No background in any of the subjects that he talked about, given an enormous influential platform to talk about everything under the sun, right?
Yeah.
It goes even further back than that. It goes even further back than that. Really, it goes right back to our prehistory. I mean, if you look at, it sounds really terrible, but a lot of the time priests, right? Priests are not qualified to talk about what they talk about 90% of the time, are they?
No, I see what you mean.
Some of them are.
Yeah,
Don't get me wrong. There is a long story tradition of education amongst the priesthood, but that does not give them a license to talk about things like, for example, cosmology, unless they've studied cosmology. It doesn't give them license to give counseling to their parishioners if they haven't done any work or studies in counseling, right?
Yeah.
But they do.
No, right. And I mean,
it's madness.
Yeah. I mean, on the specific point of GB News, I always feel like, on the plus side, nobody's watching it. So that's nice. But I think as well that for me, they're just, they're a manifestation of what our print media has been in this country for certainly my lifetime.
Yeah. Definitely.
The print media in this country has always been just this appalling, just fire hose of shit. I mean, it just has been
poison into culture. That's all it's ever been.
Yeah.
It's just poison. But it's so much worse than that in many respects, because it's not just poison, it's also shackles, it's chains, It's ultimately the means by which the people who own those mediums shackle the minds of the nation, right, and direct us down particular paths. And it's always damaging. It's never good for us. It's never good for us. It's good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the qualification thing's interesting, isn't it? The expertise thing is interesting. It's the classic joke that you see circulating about it on Twitter is like, we're going to have a debate on climate change. So on the one hand, we're going to have someone who's an expert in climate science, and to balance, we're going to have a fuckwit who knows absolutely nothing about it.
It's the BBC notion of balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the BBC notion of balance. So
look, I not to jump on my old hobby horse, I think it's the liberal notion of balance. I think this is part of the liberal disease.
Yeah, and it's cowardice ultimately, isn't it? It's cowardice. It's this whole liberal notion of not ever wanting to take a position on fucking anything, ever. They will be dancing, they will be quibbling at the very edge of apocalypse. They really will, and humming and hawing. Oh well, you've got to take both sides into account, don't you? Fuck off.
Yeah.
At the very least, I wish they'd just get out of our fucking way. If they're not going to take a position, fine. But the worst of it, if let's assume there is some turnaround, and you know what, it might happen. There are movements in this country now that I never thought to see again, like the workers' movements at the moment. The unionist movements are insane right now. I do think, barring some real crackdown, we're on the edge of kind of like a workers' revolution in this country, certainly with regards to unionized action. Happen. But the fucking liberals, if that gathers steam, and if that actually does end up changing things for the better, the fucking centrists and liberals will be there right at the end going, oh well, we were always behind them, weren't they? Yay. Fuck you. I have less time than I ever did before. It's insofar as I'm concerned, in many ways they're worse than the fucking fascists. They're worse than the fucking Nazis and right-wing supremacists. At the very least, they fucking believe in what they're doing. It's evil, it's corrupt, it's insidious, but they believe it. These fuckers are just like they're the mealy-mouthed little shit-weasel kids who would hang around with the bullies in the schoolyard because they were too weak to do the fucking bullying themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's often the case. I think for me, even at their best, the problem is that they kind of mistake. It's almost like they have a category error. I mean, the thing that I always think about with liberals is the fetishization of compromise. That's always one of the values that I think, like, when liberals, I mean, and I'm talking about reasonably intelligent thinking liberals, when they talk about their philosophy and they talk about compromise, they describe compromise almost in religious terms. It's a kind of ideal, it's a kind of platonic, and for me it fundamentally misunderstands how politics works, how power structures work,
how reality works. You can't compromise on reality. Ultimately, you can't take a climate, like what every climate scientist in the world is saying, and say, oh well, let's compromise and let's see what Gary from down the street is also saying about the situation. That's not compromise.
I mean, part of the error is the classic error of thinking of that, which again is a very knee-jerk liberal position of saying, oh well, the truth's probably somewhere in the middle. And that's always, that's just such a base logical fallacy, because of course that's simply not true. The truth may lie somewhere in the middle. It may lie 98% on one side or the other, or one side may actually be right.
One side may actually be right.
Actually be wrong.
And in many instances, it is absolutely the case.
Yeah, exactly.
It is just absolutely the case. It is not the case that there are multiple, equally viable positions. There's right and wrong.
It's like this side has all these facts lined up against them, but on the other hand, this side has a lot of vibes. So who's to say?
Yeah. Who's to say? Right?
And that's oh well, it's complicated. That's the classic liberal response. Oh well, it's always more complicated than you think.
Yeah, it's also what's driving a lot of the anti-trans stuff at the moment as well.
Jesus Christ.
I mean, I hate it when the argument is brought down to biological essentialism, because I think that's a terrible argument for anything, particularly with regards to civil liberties and whatnot.
No, I agree.
We shouldn't give a fuck whether it's got biological basis or whatever. Who gives a shit? Who gives a flying fuck? It's dragging it back to. Do you remember, like in the mid 2000s, when there was a lot of debate about gay marriage and whatnot, and the anti-side were always, it's a choice. That was their basis. That was their bedrock. And my argument was always, stop engaging them on that level. Just say, yeah, fine, okay.
Yeah, it is a choice. And fuck you.
Whatever.
Do we live in a free society or do we not?
So now where are you going to go with that? Exactly. Because lots of things are a choice. Yeah. Lots of things are a choice.
It's a different context, but I remember having this conversation with a work colleague a long time ago where they said, they said something like, I don't feel comfortable with, when you see Muslim women wearing burqas, I feel really, I don't know. And I remember turning around to this person and saying, hey, I could wear a fucking burqa if I want.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We live in a country where you can wear what you want.
Exactly, yeah.
End of fucking story.
End of conversation.
Miss me with all of that bullshit.
Yeah.
We live in a free society. You can wear what you want.
I don't care what makes you uncomfortable. Nobody cares what makes you uncomfortable.
You don't have the right to not feel uncomfortable when you walk down the fucking street. I'm sorry,
exactly.
You don't have that. You don't.
Not with regards to other people's choices.
Not with regards to other people's choices. That's right.
You don't. Sorry.
I have to live in a fucking world where Tories exist. Do you know what I mean? Like,
exactly this. I mean, I have to live in a country where wherever I fucking turn, there are expressions of nationalism, fucking everywhere. That makes me uncomfortable. That makes me uncomfortable. I'm not going to tell people to take them down because it's up to them, isn't it? I think they're wrong.
Yeah.
And I think it's ugly. But I'm not going to tell them to take them down.
No, this is it. It's And I feel for me, it's the same thing. Whether it's the climate denialism, whether it's the anti-trans thing, and I mean, the reason the trans issue is taken off right now is because it's, I mean, in the US, abortion's always been a useful wedge issue.
Exactly that. It's useful. That's it.
It's never worked well here. But but the trans issue, and it's really unfortunate that we've got this very small sliver subsection, and it is a subsection or even a subsection of second wave feminism, because there's a lot of second wave feminists who are pro-trans rights. Let's never forget that. It's this I would say even probably the majority of even second wave feminists are actually in favor of trans rights. So this is let's not give them the fig leaf of respectability on that one either.
Absolutely no. I mean, anything that calls itself feminism that doesn't take into account all women, and that includes trans women, isn't feminism. It's as simple as that.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
as simple as that. And the fact that they are increasingly marrying themselves to misogynistic right-wing movements and ideals, and they're not even speaking up, when it's revealed that this is the case, they retreat, they recoil, I mean, that's the most amazing thing. The pipeline from anti-trans, from TERF to fascist is basically a vertical shoot at this point.
It's really, really terrifying, and again, it's that liberal thing again. These so-called liberal positions who don't even seem to understand the enormous danger. Because for me, it's always been the case that anti-fascism should be. I mean, I think for me that's a minimum standard. Actually, if you can't uncomplicatedly, uncompromisingly, without any real hesitation or qualification, describe yourself as anti-fascist, I'm probably not interested in your politics.
Yeah, not interested in a
worried
thing
about your politics, but
yeah.
I'm probably not interested in anything you have to say, because that, for me, is just a baseline of like, that's the bar you should have to cross before you can enter the public arena of debate.
Exactly that. I mean, this is. I mean, we've talked about this before, but there being parameters for the discourse, right? Be minimum criteria for the discourse on anything. That's something we just don't have in this country, and we're so used to not having it.
Yeah, that's it.
We find when people who come into situations like Mick Lynch and the representatives of the unions, they're not doing anything that profound. When you actually watch them, they're not doing anything that clever. They're not engaging in any kind of rhetorical trick or anything like that. All they're doing is bullet point stating facts. That's it.
I mean, they're not, in all honesty as well, they're not doing anything remotely radical either. And I don't say that, I say that as a value neutral description, but they're not saying anything radical. Actually, what's interesting for me about it is when you watch, that wonderful week, right, where Mick did the round of the news media, and they all just showed their entire arses. It was just wonderful. But for me, the most telling moment was when Kay Burnley, who's normally pretty good. I mean, she's a good interviewer a lot of the time. Like when I say good, she's good at that particular form of performative theatrical interviewing that passes for political interviews these days. But she's skilled, let me put it like that. But she completely fell apart because she was stuck on this script about picket lines and the 80s. And what it made me realize was that was the skeleton key for me. When you rewatch all of that stuff, the news interviewers that were getting him on were expecting him to be implacably hostile, and they were interviewing him like he was Arthur Scargill. Well, guess what? The union movement has learned a thing or two since the 80s. About leadership and about expression and about message management and about how you present yourself. And the law has changed since the 80s such that the strikes on those scale and the flying pickets and all those things are no longer possible under current trade union legislation. The union movement has been forced to adapt to that, and it has been a painful learning process for the union movement, by the way, because we're in a very, very restrictive environment now in terms of what you can do to support the rights of your workers. But they have adapted. They have found strategies that worked. I mean, interestingly, one of the most draconian bits of anti-union legislation at the moment is that not only do you have to pass a ballot before you can do strike action, that ballot has to be passed by over 50% of your members. Right. So over 50% of your membership has to have voted, or the ballot is declared invalid regardless of the result. Now, if you apply that to the Houses of Parliament, we'd have about 150 MPs. Right. If you made that the threat, just to be clear about how profoundly anti-democratic that is. Now, that was designed to kibosh, to deeply damage the union's ability to effectively mobilize and to take strike action, right? But guess what the union movement had done is take the time to figure out what that means, develop stronger relationships with their members, more active members. Now those unions are getting 85% turnout for their votes. Well, guess what? That completely screws the idea. It reinforces the kind of democratic nature of those unions. It makes those mandates incredibly strong, and it makes those actions incredibly determined and powerful.
Actually, it's worked the other way in many respects, hasn't it? It's made people, because if you're going to do it, and on that scale, it means that the problem is profound and needs addressing, right?
That's right. Now,
and it means that people are invested,
Now, it's still, we should not lose sight of the fact that it is still profoundly anti-democratic. It should never have been passed. It's an absolute travesty. But what's happened is the successful unions, and by the way, not all of them have been successful, we have to acknowledge that, but the successful unions have absolutely found a way to make lemonade out of that situation by saying, okay then, so we have now got to have a really robust democratic process. We've got to have massive engagement with every single member so that we can mobilize the way we need to. And that's why we're now facing a summer and early autumn of massive strike actions, because those unions have built that strength, and they're kind of bulletproof now on that line. There's no line of attack around, people didn't really want to strike in the first place. Yes, they fucking did.
Yes, they did. And there's nothing you can do.
Numbers. Exactly.
And also, not only that, we're on social media. We can just say, yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, my union, I think, is striking in November, I think it is, or October. Unison, we're striking. So that's the care. That's going to be huge. That is.
Unison are balloting in a number of areas. I think Unison are also. I heard something that I think Unison staff who work in higher education are balloting at the moment as well.
Yeah.
Unison have staff in HE, so and obviously UCU. I mean, it's a more mixed picture with them, but I know that they've had some successful actions so far, and I know they're going to be balloting again soon. But yeah, it's an incredible moment, and I think I'm with you. I mean, that gives me hope. Extinction Rebellion have woken back up and done a couple of things like that. They always give me hope. I mean, you can criticize individual actions as being perhaps ill thought out, but as, I mean, for my money, they've still done more than almost any other political organization to move the conversation forward, and you've got to respect that.
And I don't care about little blips. I really don't care about little blips and ill thought out actions. To be perfectly honest, I care about impending climate apocalypse. So
there was a moment where a subgroup of XR people, I think they superglued themselves to some tube trains, and that was dumb. I mean, I'm quite happy to criticize that as an individual action that was just dumb. You don't hit public transport because public transport is part of the solution, and you don't hit it during peak travel hours because you're just pissing off a bunch of commuters, working people who are trying to do it.
Working class people,
It was a bad idea. It was badly thought out. They shouldn't have done it. I'm happy to say that. It was a stupid idea. But, it was one group. It was one group, made one decision one time. And I remember seeing lefties on Twitter sounding up, well, this is the moment that Extinction Rebellion became irrelevant. And this just shows that Extinction Rebellion are a middle-class movement that have fundamentally no understanding. And it's just like, nah, fuck off for that.
No, that is simply not true. And it's the lack of equivalence that always gets me as well.
Exactly,
They'll allow any number of atrocities from right-wing movements, right?
Yeah.
They'll allow the murder of Joe Cox. We've allowed it. We really have. In the wake of that, Britain First should be dead. All of it should be gone. It should be illegal. It should be
UKIP should have been
should have been done.
Buried by that.
People like Farage should be fucking gone.
Yeah.
But we don't apply the level, the same equivalence, do we?
No, we don't. And look, I think I'm not, to be clear about this as well, I'm not willing to abandon the fact that the left has higher standards. We should. That's why we're the left. That's fine.
Absolutely.
It's not about that. But for Christ's sakes, you've got to reach a point, surely, where it's like, are we really going to condemn an entire movement which previously had shut down the entire central London for a week and caused the government of the day to declare a climate emergency in the House of Commons? Are we really going to say that we're abandoning everything that they've done because one splinter group of idiots did one stupid thing? Like, fuck off.
Well, you can see it
glued themselves to a tube train. They didn't kill anybody. It wasn't an act of terrorism.
It was more an act of stupidity.
It was just a badly thought out action. It was just a badly thought out. That's going to happen in a decentralized, non-leadership. That's the way these kind of organizations are designed to work. And it's just,
and also in the state of desperation where nobody else seems to be fucking doing anything. This
is always my response whenever I saw someone Twitter. I mean, I didn't do it because I'm too polite. But like my immediate gut response from reading it was
what the fuck are you doing?
Which branch are you a fucking member of, mate?
Yeah, what are you fucking
if you think they're not doing, I'm not being funny, they're a flat organization. If you think you could do it better, fucking go on. They'll be happy to hear from you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Get in touch, get involved, find an action that's going to be more meaningful and do that instead.
Absolutely.
But don't sit there on Twitter, don't sit on your ass and tell me that that's it. They're a middle class movement. They've abandoned all pretense at being, being anything meaningful. This is their relevance is gone for. Like, fuck off, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's true. You can see the lack of equivalence with very particular examples. So look at the treatment of Dawn Butler as opposed to Nadine Dorris, Priti Patel. Dawn Butler is not very good in front of the camera. That's absolutely true. She should probably stay away from being in front of the camera because she's not that good at it. It doesn't matter. She's an excellent MP.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's an absolutely amazing MP. Her constituents love her. Yeah. Nobody else gets a look in because she's good at what she does, right? You compare and contrast to the treatment of, say, Nadine Dorris, who is not only... She's made gaffe after gaffe after gaffe after gaffe. She's supported the most awful people in the world. She's done some of the stupidest things imaginable and is also bordering on that neo-fascist thing.
Yeah.
Let's just, Priti Patel, one of the worst human beings operating in politics right now.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
A true, complete fascist. Yeah, a complete hypocritical fascist, Just completely brazen with it. A complete and utter fascist. Not only that, but should be in jail.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
should be in jail.
Most of the cabinet should, but yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, yeah,
it's amazing. I've tried to explain this to like some of my more liberal associates who was like, "Oh, I don't like that Dawn Butler. Why don't you like her?"
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about it? Have you ever sat down? Can you give me an example, like a concrete example of why you don't? And then can you tell me what you think of Priti Patel or of Nadine Dorries? And they don't really have an opinion, you know. Oh, I don't like them, but
yeah. But also, I mean, like Diane Abbott was the one for me. I mean, she gave
Diane Abbott. That's what Dawn Butler. What am I saying? Diane Abbott. That's what I meant. Sorry. Yes.
No, it's okay.
Diane Abbott. Sorry. Yes.
No, it's all right. I mean, because she had. I mean, what actually happened was in that general election campaign, she gave a couple of bad interviews because she was ill. Is what actually happened. That was the fact of it. You know, she'd only recently had a diagnosis and she didn't know what was going on. She was under the weather. She made one gaffe with a figure, and it was just like
that's it. That's who I meant. I meant Diane Abbott. I don't know why I said Dawn Butler, but Diane Abbott is who I meant. Yeah. She. You know, you look at her.
Followed her forever and her reputation. And actually, like, you know, if you look at her in the round, you look at. I mean, she spent years with Andrew Neil and on This Week with Andrew Neil and who's that Tory prick who doesn't do politics anymore. That's so wonderful that I've forgotten his name. Portillo.
Oh, Portillo, yeah.
Hope as was, yeah. So, you know, and that's so she's on that show with two pretty hardcore right wingers, and she held her own in debate and conversation for years. Really skilled TV performer. And instead of like seeing her go off a dip and think like, well, what's going on there? And it's look, I expect that bullshit from the right. That's what they're there for, right? They never play fair. They never. But again, you're right. It's the criticisms that come from the left at that point. You just think like, guys, come on.
Yeah. And also, I mean, like, I know we should hold ourselves to a higher standard. I get that. But sometimes we do need to be a bit more exclusionary with these people. We need to tell them, you know what, you don't get to talk.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We have a real problem on the left with that, where we will engage. We will engage as though they have a right to like define the parameters of debate. I mean, I was thinking about this recently with like the new escalation of the anti-LGBTQ stuff, which is becoming exactly like it was in the late 90s. Yeah. Fucking members of the Anglican Church talking to me about child abuse, talking in the context of LGBTQ people. I was like, no. Yeah. I am going to throw in your face every single fucking scandal, right? Every single one. You don't get to talk. You know.
I'm not hearing that from any religious community. Full stop. You don't get to talk to me about child abuse.
The Republican Party, no. Right. The Tories, no. The Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, all of the evangelical churches, no. Sorry, fuck off.
Yeah.
It's just no. It is just no. I'm really sorry. You don't get to talk at all about sexual morality, especially in contexts of children.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you got you got your card revoked for that particular conversation.
Yes. You have abandoned any right to the discourse. Yeah. You know what? From my perspective, I'm really sorry. You don't get to have an opinion. If you are still part of those organizations, if you're still supporting those ideologies, you don't even get to have an opinion. Sorry.
Well, you certainly. I think for me, I think my slight nuance to that would be like, I have no interest in anything you have to say that's not attending to the shit in your own back garden.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
All I want to hear is groveling, self-excoriating apology, and then I want to hear solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
Beyond that, nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah, this is not a subject about which you get to pontificate.
Exactly. This is not something you get to talk about. At all.
Yeah.
And as for the groomer discourse, I will fucking launch at someone. If I hear that in my waking life, if I hear that, I will be going to jail.
I mean, so what's fascinating about that for me is two things. The first is obviously the fact that is so horrifyingly, transparently fascist.
Yeah.
That is like fucking textbook 101 fascism. To accuse people from any kind of background that deviates from a kind of horrific, idealized, homogenous, fucking cis het straight white thing as being a danger to children.
Yeah, it's 101. It's base level, isn't it?
This is not right wing. This is fascism.
Yep.
Anyone who uses groomer, you are using fascist language. You are engaging in fascist rhetoric.
It's always amazing as well. What really amazes me is how consistently they come from backgrounds that actually have groomed children, that cultivate that cultivate cultures of enshrined child abuse. That's the most amazing thing to me.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
Wow.
But there's well, look, there's this kind of thing going around of like every when it comes to the far right, every accusation is a confession, right?
Yeah. Well, it's the old was it Goebbels who wrote this in his memoirs? This is what you do, right?
Yeah.
You accuse the other side of that which you are guilty. Yeah.
And that's something that's increasing. I mean, that's also Trumpian, that's also Johnsonian. That's something that both of those political leaders have, and it's not, it's a complicated relationship. I think I've described Johnson a few times now as being he was never the problem per se. I think he is both a morbid symptom and he has been an accelerant. And I think Trump's
exactly
the same.
Exactly
and that is obviously that's a very potent and dangerous combination. But it is a mistake. I think it's a fundamental error to treat him as the cause.
Absolutely. This notion that if these individuals disappear, the problems will disappear. They won't. I'm really sorry.
They're not doing, are they? I mean,
no.
The United States has just outlawed abortion, and when you look at the final two in the Tory leadership contest, it's do we want the guy who had a green card as a member of the United States, as a citizen of the United States while he was Chancellor of the United Kingdom, or do we want the person who looks like a knockoff, dismissed as being too extreme version of a Not the 9 O'Clock News sketch from the fucking 80s. I mean, that's our choice now.
That's it.
One
that's
of those
where
people
we are,
is going to be prime minister. They're currently tearing strips off each other for who's really going to end up sending more people to Rwanda once they get back in. Who's going to privatise Channel 4 how quickly?
Yeah.
And it's just like who
can be more fascist? Who can be the worst fascist?
Who's going to win the race to completely dismantle all of the human rights advances we've made as a result of European legislation? Who's going to get that done in 90 days? Who's going to get it done in 120?
But once again, they're the symptoms. They're not the problem. They're the symptoms of it.
No.
The symptoms are much more sort of in our wheelhouse. They're on our level in many respects, because it's the people who will allow for it, as though it's business as usual. Oh, well, that's just the way it is, isn't it?
That's where the media culture is so fascinating, because there was a moment, as with Trump, there's a moment when the media comprehensively turned on Johnson, and it happened overnight, literally overnight. And the reporting, it was exactly what would amaze me was how much it mirrored Trump. Whereas, you had one day where they'd say, this is what happened, Trump said this, Democrats said that. And then overnight, once the election was lost and he kept insisting it was what it went from that to a model where it went, Trump said this, that is a lie. This is the truth.
Right.
They did exactly the same thing with Johnson overnight. And the thing that always hits me, it hit me then and it hit me again, with this recent example with Johnson, was like, you could have done that any fucking time you wanted.
Exactly. It's like Twitter and Trump, isn't it?
Yeah.
They could have got rid of him at any time, right?
They could have got rid of him in 2016.
Yeah,
and they should have done, because it was just like, because the thing is, nothing's different. He was telling lies then, just like he's telling lies now. It's no different. This farcical, this fictional, this bizarre assertion, and then this feels very liberal as well somehow. I can't quite explain why. Notion that, oh no, there's just some line that's finally been crossed. Like, fuck off.
Fuck off. No, there hasn't.
He's lived his entire life on the wrong side of that line.
Yeah. From the very beginning, he has been a venal, narcissistic, lying sack of shit. Yeah?
Doesn't matter which one you talk about. Same person.
No, same person. They may as well be. They may as well be.
Yeah, that's right.
It makes no difference to us down here,
Look, there's a way in which that's useful, right? So for the thinking person who is engaging with the media, this will awaken for some people a much needed cynicism about, well, hang on a minute. You always knew it was like this. Why is it taking this long? Why is this suddenly happening? I think it will create that kind of that moment of realization for some, at least. But of course, at the same time, it's terrifying because it just further, I mean, correctly in this case, but still it further undermines faith and trust in our institutions. In this case, our institutions whose job it is to keep us informed. Now, I think it's a long overdue reckoning that because our news media almost entirely has failed us as an electorate in a spectacular fashion. I know they consider what they do. Many of them do genuinely. I mean, many of them don't, but many of them do genuinely consider what they do to be a sacred duty and trust. And they have broken it utterly. They have failed us miserably.
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's even worse than that in many respects. It has become a quagmire.
Well, that's
the whole arena has just become toxic.
The good ones have failed us completely. The bad ones have actively accelerated us towards the situation in which we find ourselves.
And it's so sad because it leaves you in this really very dangerous place where you are using language which could come off as paranoid conspiracy theorist and so on and so forth, because the whole mainstream media discourse can come off in that way, but it doesn't make it less true.
But it's so naked now. I mean, that's the thing. I did used to worry about that. I used to worry about the perception. Partly I'm getting older and I give less of a shit what people think of me anyway. I'd rather just tell the truth. But also, I do genuinely think it's more naked than it's ever been. And we talked about it before, and we did a whole show about it. But I think for me, the enormous power of Don't Look Up is how much it laid that bare, and that's why it got a lot of bad reviews from traditional media, because they
hated it. Yeah, it called them out. That's why they hated it. That's absolutely it, and it made them ridiculous. It actually what I love about it is that it didn't go that far.
Yeah,
I don't think anyway. People condemn it for being ridiculous. I've seen worse than that.
Well, what's lovely about that is, have you seen since there were people have clipped together real footage of people talking about the heat wave with Don't Look Up, and actually the Don't Look Up ones look more reasonable than look more reasonable. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think that bubble's well and truly burst, and I think and good. I mean, I think it's past time, because we do. One of the things we need to figure out, and this goes back to what you were talking about earlier about platforms and about the notion of who we decide to platform, and it's and that thing about almost needing minimum standards for platforming. I think it's clear, it's increasingly clear to me that the left needs to develop its own platform. And what's interesting to me is that the appetite is clearly there in a way perhaps it hasn't been before now. And so there are opportunities there as well as sort of enormous threats and challenges. But I think for me, I'll be interested to see what happens. It keeps rumbling. I mean, the unions feel like a natural place to sit at least some of this stuff, because they're riding such a good wave at the moment, and they are big institutions. They have a certain amount of financial power base. Yes, there's all the problems you get with them being in big institutions as well, that you get with any big institution. There are issues, there's pluses and minuses to that, but they have a certain amount of weight, a certain amount of heft right now. So that's one possible source for it. But
it's also rooted in something practical, isn't it? I mean, that is a good stepping stone into the more sort of ideological stuff, because it's very rooted in what people can understand, right?
But I also think at this point, I think, and I haven't developed this thought very far at all, but I think there's an enormous amount of merit in grounding it in the practical. Actually, that's part of the reason that media campaign was so incredibly successful. People kept trying to draw, Mick Lynch out into talking about ideology. I mean, are you a fucking Marxist?
I mean, what a ridiculous.
And he was just
quite right.
He laser beam focusing on this is the issue. Right. This industry has a ton of money. It's all going to shareholders. We've been underpaid for years and years and years. We've got a cost of living crisis happening. We're just asking for what we have made a decision not to be poor anymore. I mean,
laser beamed right through. And I mean, this is another example of what we were talking about with minimum standards for the discourse. How much I would lay money that the person asking that question, "Are you a Marxist?" has never read a fucking word of Marx. I would lay down every.
Well, it was Richard Madeley, so you bet.
Well, there you are. Every penny I've got. Every penny I've got.
Well, it was so Weasley. It wasn't even that. What Madeley said was, now there are some people who have said that you're a Marxist.
Oh God!
He wasn't even prepared to own it himself. It's just like, well,
there are some people who have. Well, what do you even mean, Richard? Define your fucking terms. What do you mean, Marxist? What type of Marxist?
Richard, go back and ask those people what they mean and film that conversation.
Yes, yeah.
Leave it out of this one entirely. You know what I mean?
Yeah. God almighty. And read the fucking manifesto, will you? For fuck's sake. Jesus God. At least. Minimum standards,
God.
right?
Or
if you're going to use if you're going to use that language,
yeah.
Read the fucking the fucking groundwork.
Do the fucking homework. That's it.
This is why I won't talk to homophobes anymore. It's exactly that. I used to a long time ago. I won't anymore. I just won't. They just don't get to talk to me, you know.
I mean, I don't know. I completely respect that. I think we're at a point now. Yeah, it's really tough, and it is scary. I mean, the groomer stuff is terrifying to me.
Absolutely.
Because again, it's that thing of like, and I don't know the degree to which people realise that's straight up fast shit, and seeing how neatly, how perfectly, depressingly, obviously, it's dovetailed into the turf thing, and how they've just they smacked together just as the two pieces of a puzzle have just snapped together the way we've been warning for years was going to happen.
Right. J.K. Rowling recently, she shared an article which it basically it didn't outright say it, but it basically its undercurrent was people who identify as men cannot be carers because men are automatically rapists, basically.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And abusers.
Oh my God.
It's like, wow, okay, bitch, you're in my wheelhouse now. On every level.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
That was.
In an industry, by the way, in a sector that is crying out for men.
Oh yeah.
It's crying out for men because men generally don't stay in care if they start in it, sadly.
Right.
It's one of the ongoing issues of the sector, you know?
Yeah.
And it always has been. Due to preconceptions of masculinity and femininity and all that toxic bullshit, which, by the way, this woman who calls herself a feminist is now buying into and now fomenting.
Yeah, relentlessly reinforcing. Yeah.
The original feminists, the actual feminists, would be appalled at this movement, which is trying to tie women to their biological conditions, to their anatomical conditions. It would be appalled.
Yeah. No, it's
the work that has been done by the original feminists to liberate women from their biology is incredible, right?
And by the way, feminism done right liberates men as well.
Yes, it does. It liberates us all done well.
Because it is fundamentally a philosophy of liberation.
Yeah. And also, it undoes those shackles of prescriptions of what is male and what is masculine and what is feminine, Well,
that's exactly
that basically kill us, that kill us. I mean, the rates of suicide and attempted suicide and self-harm amongst straight men in this country is abhorrent.
Then what the fuck do people think we mean when we say toxic masculinity? It's not just toxic for women, it's toxic for men too. It kills men.
Yeah. En masse, so it transpires en masse,